3 kingdoms had been destroyed by a powerful dragon. His name was God Killer. He was known from legends. The hooded man was counting the seconds. Everything was too slow, and he didn't like it. The man in the cloak thought that he was a useless creature with this mark, and also that his development had reached its limit. The man thought that in a place above the heavens, what scientists call the universe, there should exist stronger monsters, not 2 or 3 times stronger. Their stamina and defense should be 100 times stronger, and their attacks 1,000 times stronger. The man realized that if it took him 27 seconds to kill a monster at this level, he wouldn't be able to defeat those. Even if he trained without respite, he wouldn't be able to defeat the monsters from the universe. And the reason for all this was the mark on his hand. His mark is not meant for battles. Despite that, he plans to obtain the powerful magic of this world, the magic that belonged to the scholars and the god of war. Despite the fact that he has the weakest mark, he is willing to do his best to reach this stage. However, now he has reached his limit. The mark is given to a person from the moment of birth, and there is no way to change it. However, the man knew that the only way out was reincarnation. If he used this magic, he could change everything. The man dreamed that one day he would be able to challenge the entire universe and get to places where no man has ever set foot. In addition to becoming stronger, he needs to find strong people to practice magic to influence people. Because you should not be a loner, you need to prevent your mistakes. The man managed to reincarnate. He appeared in the body of a young boy. Looking at his hand, he noticed that he now had a quarter mark, and that was just fine. In this world, he had the name Matthias Hildesheim. He was the 3rd son of the Duke of Hildesheim. It would be some time before his memories came back. However, the reincarnation was successful. The boy was only 6 years old. At that age, everyone learns and practices. However, he needed information first. The boy walked over to the bookshelves. He knew very well that nobles always have a lot of books, and it looks like there are a lot of useful ones. He started looking for an interesting book. At that moment, a guy named Lake came up to him. Lake asked the boy what he was looking for in the bookshelves. Lake realized that the boy was looking for a book about magic and offered him to read it. Matthias replied that he could read it himself. But when he looked at the pages, he realized that he really couldn't read at all. The boy was shocked that he had fought for hundreds of years, had been to countless kingdoms, and knew 27 languages. But now, he couldn't understand a single letter. He even wondered what era he had been reborn in. Matthias asked Lake to read a book for him, and he said he would if he asked him to. Lake said he didn't think magic was right for him. Matthias wondered why the guy felt that way. Then he noticed that Lake's brother was type 2. The magic element is based on their nature. There are only 4 types of marks. The first type is specialization on crafting. It is not meant for battle, and that is the type of mark he had in his past life. The second type is specialization in power. It does not have many advantages. However, through constant training, the bearer will be able to use higher level magic. The third type is specialization in speed magic creation. Supposedly weak in magic, but with constant practice, speed fire damage will increase, suitable for mopping up the battlefield. The fourth type is a melee specialization, small radius, can use fire and speed fire magic of the second and third type, high level of magic. Matthias thought that he would have to be reborn several times, but he was able to get the fourth type the first time. It made his tears flow. Noticing this, Lake asked if this book was so touching. The book is about a made-up adventure, which was not very helpful for the boy. However, by reading and listening, he began to understand the alphabet. After reading for a little while, Lake said he had to go to work. Lake patted the boy's hair and told him not to be bored. Matthias was not happy about being treated like a child. He then decided that he couldn't read yet. He would leave the information gathering for later, but for now, he would practice, because it was more important to increase his stamina and mastery of magic day by day. When the boy went outside, he was greeted by people around him, because he was the son of a lord. Matthias realized that this world was different from his world, because here magic equipment was not used in everyday life. He then assumed that magic was not popular here, because there were no farming equipment, no robots, no molecular acceleration equipment, not even machines for construction. The boy realized that he had probably gone back in time 12,700 years according to the mage's calendar, but he didn't care, because the most important thing was that he had the fourth mark. On the way, Matthias met his brother named Vigle. His brother Vigle started yelling at the boy and asking him what he was doing here. Matthias fearfully asked his brother if he was not allowed to be here. Vigle angrily yelled that he had been told that many times, and he was a disgrace to their family. Vigle shouted that Matthias was a weakling, even though he had the mark, and as soon as he inherited the place, he would throw him out. Matthias was amazed that his brother had called him a wimp with a mark. Vigle kept yelling that he didn't understand anything at all, and that he was the most useless child in the family. The boy didn't understand why a 14-year-old brother would talk to a 6-year-old child like that. Matthias wondered if Vigle could really inherit this place, since he wasn't even reborn. The older brother shouted that he wanted to show him the man that carries the mark of honor. Vigle raised his hand like a madman with the not-so-great mark and shouted that it was divine magic for the chosen one, the mark of honor. Matthias didn't even know how to react to such a stupid action from his older brother. Matthias doubted it was divine magic. After all, it didn't matter what he looked like. It was the first mark. The scholars of the institutes always had one condition: the person entering must not be the first mark, and that was the reason why Matthias was reborn. Meanwhile, Vigle had said that Matthias' mark was useless, because he couldn't use even the simplest magic with it. The younger brother was stunned by these words. Matthias realized that Vigle seemed so desperate that he even believed his own lies. Vigle noticed the way Matthias looked at him, and yelled that he had no respect for his older brother at all. The boy, on the other hand, thought about how his older brother was ridiculously stupid, so there was no need to even fight him. He activated the body enchantment of leg strength. And right after that, Matthias rushed to run away from his stupid older brother. Vigle ran after him, but he couldn't catch him, which of course made him very angry. As Matthias ran away, he thought that Vigle was very stupid, because he didn't even know a simple body enchantment, which could be done by anyone. Matthias came to the realization that he had all his memories of his past in his head, so there was no point in messing with Vigle at all, and should just run away. Matthias was able to run away from his annoying older brother with ease. The boy noticed that the fourth mark was completely different, because it used less stamina and mana than he thought. The fourth mark enchanted the body, so the effect was more than expected. Matthias came to the conclusion that this was his best reincarnation ever. Matthias then decided to test his power and use passive search. In his past life, he could search within a radius of several hundred kilometers, but now he can only search within a radius of 1 kilometer. Passive search searches for magic and magical equipment or living creatures. The boy found the bird. The distance to it was about 5 meters. The attack radius of the fourth mark is very small, and he might not be able to reach it. So he decided to find a way to reach the bird. The boy decided to activate his maximum strength, considering the peculiarities of his body and the amount of mana he had. Matthias decided to start with his legs. Then the shoulders came into play, and finally the arms. The boy threw a rock at the bird with all his might, and it hit. The dead bird fell from the branch to the ground. You get the same amount of points from monsters and animals. Once they are defeated, their magical power will be absorbed and make the winner stronger, the boy realized that this was most likely his first real fight. The boy walked over to the dead bird and began to work on it. He knew it needed its head cut off and blood collected. After all, nutrition is very valuable and protein is needed for stamina. Family dinner came. Everyone had a whole roasted chicken and vegetables on their plate. Vigle at the table sarcastically said that today was a holiday. The girl sitting across from him asked what the occasion was. Lake said that today was Matthias' 6th birthday, and they should celebrate it. The boy remembered that Vigle's birthday was coming up. It would be a whole growing up ceremony. Vigle started yelling that today was a terrible day because of Matthias' birthday. Matthias' father named Castor ordered Vigle to shut his mouth. Immediately afterward, Vigle closed his mouth and began to whistle softly, which made his father even angrier. The son's mother told Vigle angrily that Matthias had hunted and gotten this meat today, and if he didn't like it, he could just not eat it. His father asked in surprise how Matthias was able to hunt. Matthias was very confused, for his mother and father were looking at him very intently. The boy realized that in a world where magic was not developed, a 6-year-old boy could not say that he hunted with its help. So if he told the truth, there would be a lot of problems, and he did not need them. So he decided to say he was just lucky. The bird hit a tree and died right in front of him. The boy's mom asked with a smile, did the bird cut off its head and bleed for him before it died? Matthias embarrassedly told his mom that it wasn't funny. Matthias said he just picked up a nearby sharp rock to do it. His mom asked if he had done it to all 5 birds. The boy said yes. He was angry that these words were not enough to fool his mother. His mother was surprised, for there wasn't even an arrow mark on the birds, much less had she ever heard of birds dying from hitting a tree. Matthias was glad that his mother finally believed what he said. His father took a bite of chicken and asked Matthias if it was true that he was 6 years old, and he said it was his birthday. After that, his father said with a smile that he would teach him how to wield a sword tomorrow, because if he planned to leave this continent, wielding a sword would help him a lot. The boy was insanely happy that there was an opportunity to leave this place. His father then said that he was too young for that. However, since he was the youngest, he would be able to stay here and work in the fields. But if he could handle a sword, he would be able to live outside of these lands, and it would be insanely interesting. Matthias was insanely happy. Everything was going the way he wanted it to. Suddenly, however, something stirred him. The boy asked his father if he could use magic, but he laughed and said that he could, but that he was better suited for a sword. Dinner was over and Matthias retired to his room. He thought about how strange it all was, but if he was going to be good with a sword meant he could get out of here, he needed to grow up soon so he could use quadruple mark magic. The night passed, the dawn came. Since the early morning, the father was already practicing sword wielding with his sons. Matthias said hello to his father. The latter was surprised that his youngest son wanted to learn how to wield a sword so badly. Meanwhile, the boy thought about how his father did not use magic, yet his skills were amazing. Matthias started shouting that he wanted to become a traveler as soon as possible. His father was surprised. Usually everyone wants to be a knight, but travelers are just as good. He handed the boy a sword. Matthias took the sword in his hands and his father said it was time to fight. The conditions were simple. If he touched it, he would win. Matthias was angry. He didn't understand why a 6-year-old boy needed to be trained like that. His father didn't understand why his son was unhappy and said that in general, he could use either hand to fight. The boy realized that the sword arts of the Hilde family were a little different. Matthias realized that just by looking at his father, it was clear that he should not underestimate him, not even mentioning the monstrous difference in stamina, but he must learn his limit. The battle had begun. The boy ran at his father, swinging his sword, making a strike he didn't realize what had happened. The father blocked his son's blow. He collapsed to the ground. Matthias then realized that he needed to activate the body enchantment for leg strength. The boy ran up to his father, and they started their sword fight. Both father and son had a lot of strength, so no one was giving up. Matthias decided he needed to take some more action. The boy used teleportation and vanished right in front of his father. He was stunned. His son had just disappeared. Meanwhile, Matthias was already behind him and swinging his sword. Teleportation attacks the enemy at weak points, creating the illusion of disappearance. He could use this magic in his previous life, but now it requires 10 times more mana. Still close combat with a quadruple marker, it is quite different. Matthias was once again convinced that he had been reborn for a reason. It had taken him hundreds of years. But the fight wasn't over yet. A finishing blow was needed. The boy made a magical strike right into his father's shoulder. The father threw his sword into the air in surprise. The other sons watched the fight closely. The battle was over, for Matthias had touched his father with his sword. Lake could not believe that Matthias had defeated his father. Meanwhile, the loser said that he had always thought Matthias was talented with a sword, but it felt like he was a monster. Matthias scratched the back of his head and said that it was just pure luck and that his father was careless. He knew inside that they were all scared, but if it had been a real fight, he wouldn't have been able to touch his father, so he just exposed his weak point and increased his distance with his first attack. His father asked him what kind of attacks he had never seen before, and Matthias said that they were body enchantment, teleportation, and magic attacks. After saying that, father was shocked. Father and Lake began to ask Matthias what it all meant. Lake wondered how Matthias could use magic. He replied that he did it with practice. He said that didn't make sense at all. Matthias grabbed his hair and said that if you practiced all the time, you could do more. His father shouted that he almost believed him. Lake grudgingly mumbled why he had spent 7 years of his life practicing swordsmanship. Then lowering his gaze, his father said it was time to teach Matthias some common sense. Matthias asked what that meant, but his father said nothing. His father then said with a sly grin that it would be Vigle who would teach Matthias common sense. Meanwhile, Vigle was just on his way to practice, and his father yelled at him for being late, but he didn't care what he said. Matthias was once again convinced that Vigle was very stupid. His father said that today was supposed to be a normal workout, but he was lucky, so he had a choice: either do 2,000 push-ups or train with Matthias. Vigle was interested in the second option. The older brother approached Matthias and said he wanted to fight him. His father was happy about this and explained that the fight would end with one of them losing and he would be the referee. Vigle then asked his father if he would add points to Matty for personal liking. The youngest son realized that his brother was afraid that his father would rig his victory. Matthias thought that Vigle didn't know his father at all. He should know that he was talking nonsense. After that, his father said that in that case, they would do without a judge. Matthias did not understand how they would fight without a judge, for then it would not be clear who was the winner. The boy assumed that his father was up to something. Vigle asked his father to do 5 fights, and he agreed. Vigle looked at his father like a madman and said that he wasn't going to spare Matthias. He agreed to it. Matthias was scared, for Vigle and his father looked at him as if they wanted to kill him. The brothers stood across from each other, and the father asked if they were ready. Vigle told his younger brother that he shouldn't worry, as he would be lenient on him. Matthias was silent in response. His father shouted that the fight had begun. Vigle immediately ran at his younger brother with words that he would kill him. However, to Vigle's surprise, Matthias blocked his punch. The block of the blow greatly unfocused Vigle, Meanwhile, Matthias thought about just knocking him out, as his sword skills were far worse than his father's. The boy needed Vigle to lose his balance. Matthias swung at Vigle, and he immediately lost his balance. The boy didn't think it would be that easy, however, then he thought about it. Matthias assumed it was a trap. Perhaps Vigle was creating distance to use some secret magic. Matthias decided that if Vigle wanted it so badly, he would get it, since he knew his plan by heart anyway. The boy took a swing at Vigle, wishing he would finally act. In flight, Matthias didn't understand why, if it was a trap, Vigle wouldn't act. Then he noticed his older brother was scared. By the time the boy realized there was no trap, it was too late, for it had struck him in the head. Vigle threw his sword aside, and clutching his head began to scream in pain. Matthias was puzzled, for Vigle's reaction was strange, as if he had no plan. It was bad, for he could not predict his next actions. Then Matthias thought about the fact that Vigle has not lost yet. After all, the fight will end when someone surrenders, and he is probably faking and wants to activate magic. The boy decided that he had to act immediately. It was time to find out what would happen first, whether Vigle would activate the magic or he would make him surrender. Matthias pointed his sword at Vigle again, expecting a catch. However, suddenly the voice of his father was heard. He shouted for Matthias to stop. The boy lowered his sword fearfully and looked at his father. Vigle was foaming at the mouth, and rivers of tears and snot were flowing. Matthias looked at him with a smile. The boy began to ask his father if something was on Vigle's mind, but his father replied that he had nothing on his mind. Afterward, Matthias asked his father devastatedly if Vigle was really that weak. Then his father explained that Vigle was not weak, and was even stronger than most people his age. His father said in a serious voice that it was because of his strength, because it was not normal that a 6-year-old could easily defeat a 15-year-old. Matthias realized that he was right, because he had knowledge from his past life, but he was still a 6-year-old boy. Matthias was suddenly stunned. Not only was magic a problem in this era, but the sword art was also very backward. The tag is placed at birth. It will greatly affect magical abilities. The one who received the highest level of battle magic tag, aka the Sage, he wore a Type 1 tag and knew that he had reached his limit in developing his abilities. He wished to become even stronger, so he used magic to reincarnate and still retain his power. And after a successful reincarnation, he is now Matthias Hildesheim, and possesses the strongest melee marksmanship, Type 4. However, the world he finds himself in is too underdeveloped in matters of both magic and swordsmanship, and unfortunately, a Type 4 mark is looked down upon here. Matthias continued to practice both the arts of combat and magic as before. He seemed like an outsider to his family, at first quite surprised, but eventually people got used to what was going on. It had been 3 years since his reincarnation. Matthias held a book in his hand and tried to understand the mystery that shrouded the world. The men were picking mushrooms and berries in the forest when suddenly they met a huge bear. Matthias was already 9 years old. He was sitting and reading a book when suddenly he heard cries for help outside the window. Men with abrasions were yelling about magical beasts roaming the forest. They called out to Lake. He came out and replied that it wouldn't be easy because his father wasn't home right now. Suddenly Vigle grabbed him by the shoulder and said that everything was fine. Vigle pushed Lake off the aisle and yelled that he would deal with the magical monsters in the woods himself. The men hesitated, for Vigle is only the second son, at which point Matthias ran outside and said he wanted to help too. Suddenly Vigle jabbed his finger into the boy's forehead. Vigle began yelling that Matthias was not going anywhere and would stay home. An exasperated Vigle shouted that he was not allowed to cross the threshold of the house today, and it was the Lord's orders. Matthias was very upset. A small team of men had gathered under the window, and Vigle was the main man there. He was yelling that the demonic beasts should be afraid of him. Matthias saw the whole scene through the window, then sat back in his chair and thought about Vigle being a big show-off. The boy then activated the passive search. Through the passive search, the boy found a magical bear in the forest. Matthias realized that this particular response was very dangerous, so he grabbed his sword. He decided that since he wasn't allowed to cross the threshold, he would just jump out the window. He didn't care if Vigle stayed or died. However, he goes there to save Lake and the village men. When Vigle's team came to the forest, he started asking where the demon beast was. He was told that it was probably wandering around somewhere right now. Meanwhile, Matthias sat in a tree and watched from the sidelines. Vigle kicked that man in the stomach and shouted that he was useless. Matthias watched carefully at what was happening. The other man suggested that Vigle split up and start searching. Matthias thought it was a great idea, but the gentleman shouted that it was a terrible idea because something could happen to him if he was left alone. Lake entered the conversation and called out to Vigle. Lake said that the sun was starting to set, and they might not find their way home at night, so they should go back. Vigle yelled for him to be quiet. Vigle grabbed his brother by his clothes and pulled him to him, saying that the only one who gives out orders here is himself, and everyone should only obey him. Vigle shouted to the team to find the beast, and no one was going home until it was found. Lake became very hurt. However, he couldn't do anything about it. Matthias began to feel sorry for him. As the search continued, Matthias sensed that trouble was about to happen. There was a loud animal roar in the forest. Lake shouted for everyone to be very careful. Vigle, on the other hand, was glad the monster had come. The huge bear stood up on its hind legs, making it even scarier. Everyone panicked, shouting that a demonic beast had come. Matthias realized that it was an insanely strong creature, and even his father was having a hard time dealing with it. Lake tried to stop Vigle, but he only craved glory and didn't realize the danger. The men began shouting that they were proud of their master and asked to show the monster their magic. Matthias wondered what the power of his mark was. Vigle shouted that he had the power of fire circulating in his body. Vigle ordered the fire to become an arrow and kill the enemy. Meanwhile, the bear, full of rage, ran straight at the young man. This demonic bear caught the arrow with one paw. Immediately after that, the team started running away and shouting that the Lord's magic was useless. The agitated Matthias thought about how such magic wouldn't even scratch such a monster, and Vigle's spells were long outdated. The bear continued to roar, and at that moment Vigle realized the trouble he was in. The bear swung its powerful paw at Vigle and broke the tree. The young man miraculously survived. The young man was thrown back to the collapsed tree. The bear started walking towards him, and then Vigle started yelling for him to stay away. Vigle started yelling that he was a demonic beast, and he was a true lord and holder of the mark of honor. Suddenly Lake came running in, and pulling out his sword yelled for Vigle to run away, and he would try to stop the monster. Lake stood right in front of the bear, who was standing on his hind legs. Furious, Lake shouted that in the name of Hildesheim, he would not let anyone die. Lake was ready to fight the demonic monster alone. Matthias decided that Lake was a very brave man. However, there was little he could do alone, so the boy decided to help him. The boy discovered the demonic beast's blind spot and decided to activate provocative magic, a forced attack. Suddenly, the demonic beast spotted Matthias. From behind it, Lake spotted him as well. Matthias jumped out right in front of the demonic monster. Lake was angry that Matthias had come here, because he was afraid he might die. Matthias ran straight at the demonic beast. He wanted to test the results of 3 years of training on it as soon as possible. With only 4 seconds left before colliding with the demonic beast, and that was more than Matthias needed, the bear began to swing at the boy. Matthias decided to activate his body control art, and he succeeded. After that, the boy wanted to use magic to apply pressure. Matthias activated pressure directly on his heart. After doing so, Matthias realized that it was not enough, however it was enough to contain him. Matthias decided that he would activate body augmentation and top-level magic attack. Matthias jumped up and chopped off the head of the demonic beast. Lake yelled at the monster not to hurt Matthias, and then saw the monster's head fly off and stunned. Matthias and Lake looked at each other with an awkward silence, the corpse of the demonic beast lying not far from them. Matthias called out to Lake, who asked fearfully if he'd really defeated it. Matthias immediately thought that only Lake knew that he had defeated the beast. So the boy got the idea in his head to tell everyone that it was Lake who killed the demonic beast. Matthias shouted loudly that the beast was defeated by Lake. The boy asked his younger brother what he was up to and why. The boy replied that he had run away from home and no one should know about it. Besides, he didn't need prestige and fame. Matthias walked up to Lake and said that he didn't really come here at all, and it was he who killed the demonic creature. His brother replied that he couldn't lie that easily. Matthias said goodbye to Lake and ran off into the woods. The next day came. As soon as the sun rose above the horizon, Lake came into Matty's room and asked if he had a minute. It turned out that Lake had come to Matthias to give the reward for killing the demonic beast, but the boy replied that he didn't need any money and their house didn't need anything. Lake replied that he would accept the reward, however he still needed to take something. The boy showed him a shiny stone. Matthias realized that he had a magic crystal in his hand. It could be used to create an artifact. It could be crushed and made into medicine. It could even be sold, which was very convenient. Matthias took the crystal and thanked Lake. The boy then asked his older brother a question. Matthias asked Lake why Vigle was the heir if he was the eldest. Lake smiled and replied that it was decided after the inheritance exam. Matthias read the information about this exam. The heirs of each noble surname must fulfill the following criteria. The one whose ranking is higher must be the heir. In some cases, there may be additional conditions. Eldest son 5 points. The candidate that is younger than the eldest son gets -1 point for every year of difference. Honor mark 5 points. Magic skills. The strongest gets 3 points. The female heir candidate gets -2 points. Low type mark, -200 points. Matthias was horrified when he read that the low type mark was -200 points, and with his 4th type, there was nothing to talk about. Matthias realized that if that's the way things worked in the world, eldest son +5 points, difference from eldest -1 point, honor mark +5 points, it all depended on magical skills. Lake said that Vigle is better at magic than him, so he shouldn't be the heir. Matthias smiled and asked what if that's not the case. Matthias said that if he practiced seriously and more often, he could definitely beat Vigle, and besides, he could show him effective techniques to practice. After a short pause, Matthias said that the main desire is to become the heir. Vigle's first type tag allows him to use magic powers sooner, but it also limits him more. Matthias had had a hard time with it in his previous life. He didn't need to read spells, just remember how to activate his magic, and that would be enough to get ahead of Vigle. Lake clenched his fists, looked at Matthias. Then he asked Matthias to teach him, because he really wanted to defeat Vigle and be able to protect the village. Matthias said that he understood him very much, and then said that the most important thing was for Lake to trust him. The boy asked his brother if he could be blunt and strict, and Lake replied that he just didn't need to go to extremes. The boy's fist bumped. Matthias said that with him as heir, the villagers would have a peaceful and happy life. Lake was pleased to hear that. A week passed. The whole family gathered outside to watch Vigle and Lake fight. Vigle was glad that Lake decided to compete with him, because he thought he was easy to beat. Lake smiled and showed his strength, which to Vigle's surprise, was better than his. Lake smiled, showing his teeth, and aimed his power at the terrified Vigle. There was a huge explosion. Lake could use magic hundreds of times stronger than Vigle, and the news quickly spread around the world. Matthias was still amazed that this world was so strange, because to use magic, you had to recite a mantra, and casting a spell helped activate the magic. However, this cuts down the effectiveness of magic, the power of transformation. Someone must have deliberately enforced this absurdity. Matthias wondered why. Perhaps this someone wanted to slow down the development of magic. 3 years later, Lake became the official heir to the family, and Matthias began his journey when he was 12. The fight between the man and the boy continued. They both wielded their swords skillfully. The boy struck a sudden blow. The man cried out in pain. The boy rejoiced at his good fortune. Suddenly someone else attacked him. The boy managed to dodge. The hero managed to dodge the blow and was about to attack again. He intended to defeat both opponents with one blow. The boy smiled. The second opponent was annoyed. The hero disarmed both of them with one blow. The opponents flew away from him. Matthias, who was 12 years old, thanked his father and brother for the training. The weather was nice outside. The brother told the boy that he had been great. He continued that he didn't find a single weakness. Dad said it was fun to fight at full strength. He added that it was good to have such a sparring partner. The brother told Dad that he didn't seem to be a good match for him as a partner. He apologized to Dad for disappointing him. Dad replied to Lake that it wasn't like that. He explained that he'd been accepted into the Knight Academy, so he was already outstanding. Papa added that he should have remembered not to compare himself to someone as extraordinary as Maddie. Matthias asked them mentally that, although he was used to being called that, could they stop? The hero said it reminded him of something. Matthias told his dad that he said he was allowed to leave the village when he would have learned how to use a sword. Matthias asked Dad if it was possible now. Dad hesitated for a moment. The hero thought it had been 6 years. He realized that he had already learned everything he could. Matthias also realized that he needed to move on faster. Lake told him to wait. His brother explained that although he was great with a sword, he was only 12 years old. He added that Maddie wouldn't have been able to do it alone. Matthias remained silent. His father replied in the negative. He told Matthias that if he really wanted to go there, then he would let him go. Matthias rejoiced. His father exclaimed that he could take the entrance exam to the Second Royal School and study there if he could. Matthias thought it was time to travel. Matthias asked his father again what he said about the entrance exam and the certificate. The hero thought it was unfortunate because he didn't get history at all. He thought it wasn't quite the same as in his previous life. His father gave him a hug. He asked Matthias that he was dreading the exams. Dad told him not to worry. He explained that there was a hand-to-hand combat section. Dad suggested that he could give him some tips. Matthias thought it was interesting because Dad had studied there. Dad said he would have to fight one of the judges in the sword skills test. The hero was interested. Papa continued that then, when the fight started, he would have to destroy his opponent. Matthias didn't expect that. He asked himself that it was possible to just beat up the referee there. Dad continued that if it was easy to defeat the first referee, then he would have to fight the second one. Matthias realized that if he was recognized as strong, he could do it. His musings were interrupted by his father. Dad shouted that the second judge should have been destroyed in a puff of smoke. He exclaimed that it was the best strategy. Matthias thought that of course he knew that Dad couldn't be relied upon. Dad hastened to reassure him. He said that it was only necessary to get 50 points in total. Dad continued that each part of the test gave 10 points. He added that for this test, he had gotten 30 points. Dad said that, counting also the theory, he got 35 points. He added that was all it took to pass. Matthias thought it was sad that he had only gotten 5 points in theory. He thought it would be worth a shot. Matthias said that his things were already packed. He continued that magic stones and materials that would last for several years. The hero exclaimed that he was ready. Matthias walked out of the house. He was excited for his new adventure. The family was waiting for Matthias in the yard. They called out to him. Mom was worried. She asked if everything was going to be okay. She went on to ask that maybe she should have hired bodyguards. Dad yelled for her not to worry so much. Lake exclaimed that he'd beat them all himself. Matthias thought a bodyguard would be an unnecessary burden, so no. His father said that no matter how strong the judges were, then he had to beat them. He added that Matthias had to fight at full strength and break all their bones. Matthias awkwardly agreed with him. He realized that he didn't know what he had done, but his name was better left out. His brother shouted that he had waited so long for this. Matthias remained silent. He thought he'd be surprised if he said something nice. Lake said that he had promised that he would protect the place. He added that Matthias could come back anytime he wanted. Lake wished his brother luck. Matthias replied that he wished him the same. They said goodbye by bumping fists. Matthias said he was on his way. The carriage began to move. The hero looked at the scenery. He thought that he had spent several hundred years searching for boundless power. Even after reincarnation, he had sought to leave soon to become stronger. Matthias remembered his relatives. That place wasn't so bad, he thought. He sat on the roof of the carriage. The hero asked himself that he felt something. Matthias called out to the cabman. He asked that there were monsters around 3 kilometers away. The man interrogated him. He asked that even if there were, how would he know that? Matthias said he felt one, a rather large one, about 4 meters tall. The cabbie laughed. He told the hero that there were no monsters that strong in the area. He went on to say that he must have been joking. The hero thought he didn't believe him. Matthias told himself that it wasn't that big of a deal. A huge monster appeared in front of the wagon. The cabman was horrified. The man shouted that there really was a monster here. The monster was eating the animal. Matthias said he wasn't sure about its level, but if he remembered correctly, those were called war tigers. A tiger of war was a monster beast that walked on 2 paws. Matthias thought the monster was bigger than he thought. He told himself that he should have worked on his scouting skill. The man shouted, asking why he hadn't spoken up sooner. The hero replied that he had talked about it. The monster crushed the body of the elk with its maw. Red liquid squirted from the animal's wounds. The horses were frightened. There were dead elk all around. The monster had spotted them. The coachman said they were doomed because the monster had spotted them. He was terrified. The man continued that they should have run because it would have killed them. Matthias smirked. The hero jumped off the roof of the wagon. A man called out to him. Matthias said it was about time because he needed to stretch. The coachman yelled, trying to stop the hero. He asked how he could be so eager to fight with his mark. Matthias was about to attack the monster. The monster had an aggressive attitude. The man yelled and tried to stop Matthias. The monster almost grabbed Matthias with his paw. Matthias was going to dodge. The man was serious. The monster kicked at Matthias. The hero managed to dodge. Matthias looked back. The wagon had flipped over. The coachman sat crying with fear. A huge hole in the ground was left in front of the carriage. The hero thought it was a good thing he had managed to dodge. He realized that this monster had a strong aura. Matthias thought that without agility, strength was useless. The monster was about to attack again. Matthias kept his eyes on it. The hero told himself that his movements were so easy to read. The monster struck. Everything around it was in a dusty mist. Matthias dodged it. The monster noticed it hadn't hit him. The tiger began to growl. The monster hit the hero, who was floating in the air. Matthias landed gently on the tiger's paw. The monster got angrier. Matthias asked if that was all he could do. He said then it was his turn. He pulled his sword from its sheath. Matthias started running towards the monster's face. The hero mentally used the spells Physical Enhancement, Mana Hit, and Magic Control Enhancement. He told himself that 3 magic enhancements had been used. The boy had gotten stronger. He was going to defeat the monster. Matthias put his sword forward. He used the Iron Jerk spell. Iron Jerk was a spell used to improve the sharpness and strength of a sword. Although it was worse than Mana Hit, however, if used with other similar magic buffs. When Iron Jerk was used with other magic buffs, it had a crushing effect. The sword almost reached the monster's muzzle. The sword stabbed into the monster's muzzle. Matthias used all of his power. The hero was overjoyed. Blood began to drip from the monster's mouth, and it whipped from the wound. Matthias pulled his sword out of the wound. The blood splattered in different directions. The monster's eyes became stony. The hero flew off. The monster's body was falling to the ground. Blood was still spurting in different directions. Matthias gently lowered himself to the ground. Blood dripped from the tip of his sword. Matthias shouted that the fight was over. The monster collapsed to the ground. The hero put his sword away in its scabbard. He was happy. The carter was horrified. He kept repeating that it was impossible. Matthias headed toward the carriage. The carter pointed at him. The man said there was no way he was capable of defeating such a strong monster with one blow. The cabbie asked the hero that he was the reincarnation of the Holy Knight Rider. Matthias answered in the negative. He said that the monster wasn't that scary. Matthias remembered that in a past life he had known a silly knight with that name. He assumed it was just a coincidence. The hero turned to the monster's body. He wondered what was to be done about it. Matthias hesitated for a moment. The hero said he would take the magic stone and burn the rest. A light appeared in his palm. The cabman screamed, trying to stop him. The man shouted that he dare not burn such high-quality materials. He grabbed Matthias by the arm. The hero was perplexed. The cabman grabbed him by the shoulders. The man continued to shout that if he didn't need the materials, he would sell them himself. He added that such things were very valuable. Matthias said he understood him. The cabbie told him how they should haul it. Matthias told him to wait a while. The man asked that he knew the way. A magic circle started floating in the air. The hero suggested using it. The circle enlarged and began to consume the monster's body. The hero controlled the whole thing. The monster's body started to disappear. The man opened his mouth in surprise. The cabbie shouted, asking if it was storage magic. Matthias answered in the affirmative. He asked himself mentally what he was so surprised about. Matthias thought it was a common thing in his past life. The wagon began to move. The coachman was happy. He said that they were so lucky. The man continued that he would sell the monster and share the proceeds. The cabman asked that it would be nice to meet another one, wouldn't it? Matthias pondered. The hero asked the man that he had to go back after this trip. The cabman answered in the affirmative. The hero asked him to do him a favor. Matthias asked the man if he could give his share to his family and pass on the message. He thought he had to pass on the words he couldn't tell them then. Matthias said to pass on that he thanked them for taking care of him. The sun began to set. Evening came. They lit a fire. The moon was shining brightly. In the morning, they set off again. A week later, they arrived in the capital. Matthias checked into an inn. He laid out his things. The coachman came in to see him. He said that there was to be an exam tomorrow. The man added that he needed to rest for now. Matthias said he was going to go for a walk and at the same time buy a sword for the exam. The notice stated that candidates were required to carry their own weapons. Matthias' sword was made for training and was not suitable for combat. It was worth preparing for such an important exam to avoid unnecessary problems. The cabman offered to tell a little about the town. He said that the town by the castle was known for its close business. The man continued that there were many blacksmiths here. It was called the City of Metallurgy. The man added that prices were inflated and looting was plentiful. Matthias asked himself how that could have helped him. The cabbie said that was why he was going to introduce the hero to Baysan's forge. He added that it was a small but good store. The man continued that it was in a poor neighborhood and the store was quite old, but their quality was excellent. Matthias walked into the store. The salesman greeted him. The hero took the sword he had taken a liking to in his hands. He examined the weapon. Matthias said it wasn't bad at all. The hero thought that he had never seen a weapon of such quality. Matthias told himself that they were all well made, and there was no need to worry about robbery. The hero continued to examine the weapons. He noticed a sword that was separate from the others. Matthias asked himself that this sword was magical. The hero asked himself what it was. He asked himself, magical enhancement in such decline. Matthias thought that even though he wasn't a blacksmith in his past life, this wasn't normal. The hero told himself that he needed to pick up something good for the exam. He wasn't sure if he could make it himself. Matthias knew his mark was terrible for this kind of magic. Matthias heard someone arguing. The salesman yelled that no way. He yelled that the customer should have gone to another store. A child screamed, begging for Baysan. She said that this store was her last hope. The other girl told Alma that everything was fine. She said that she could handle it as it was. Alma objected that she needed a sword. The vendor replied that was impossible. He said he could have given an ordinary sword, but a magic sword was beyond the strength of a child like her. The girl shouted that they would figure it out on their own. Baysan told them to calm down for a moment. He added that he couldn't do that. Alma yelled that Ruri had to find the sword because there was already an exam due tomorrow. Matthias looked at the girls. Alma noticed Matthias. She called out to him and ran in his direction. Alma asked if he could do a magical enhancement. Matthias asked her back. The girl called out to the hero. She asked if he could do magic enhancement. Matthias asked the girl again. The girl looked at him unhappily. Matthias said that he thought he could. He thought that even if he could, he couldn't do it well with a Type 4 tag. The hero realized that compared to the backward magic of this world, his musings were interrupted by another girl. She told her friend to wait. Ruri said that someone capable of such magic to weapons couldn't have appeared out of nowhere. Baysan said that the girl was right. He added that Alma should have slowed down. Alma laughed. She said it was her mistake. Matthias remained silent. The girl screamed, asking what he had just said that could have strengthened the weapon. Matthias told them to give him half an hour, and he would give them their sword back. He added that they had to pay 40 gold pieces in advance. The girl thanked the hero loudly. Baysan was forging a new sword. The coal in the furnace was burning. Matthias said he was very surprised to hear that she could do such a thing. Alma laughed. She replied that she was in a hurry. The girl added that she was just lucky. Ruri said that Alma was a very energetic person. The girl introduced herself as Alma Repsui. She continued that, as he could tell from her name, she was a noblewoman. The girl said that she was the third daughter of a low title, so it could be assumed that she was practically a commoner. Alma said she didn't want to marry someone she didn't know, so she ran away from home and came here. The girl smiled. The hero said his name was Matthias Hildesheim, and he too was the third heir to a low title. He continued that because he didn't want to work on the farm, he came here. Ruri lowered her head. They were silent for a moment. Matthias asked himself if he had said something strange. The hero tried to calm himself down. He figured the girls just didn't hear him. Ruri blushed, and Alma noticed it. Matthias thought that it clearly wasn't from him saying something weird. He decided to introduce himself again. The hero said his name was Matthias Hildesheim, and he too was the third heir to a low title. He continued that because he didn't want to work on the farm, he came here. Alma said that he had just said that. Matthias asked himself that she had heard what he had said. The hero asked himself what the reaction was then earlier. He kept asking himself that someone had used mind control spells to attack them. Alma told Ruri to stop. She continued that it was now her turn to introduce herself. Ruri hesitantly introduced herself. Her name was Ruri Arvento Rof. She said that it was nice to meet you. Matthias thought she was such a cutie. The hero stopped himself. He told himself that she was just a girl compared to an old man like him. Matthias thought about his age. I mean, he was only 12 in this world. He asked himself that wouldn't that be okay. The girls looked at him with questioning looks. Matthias wondered what he was supposed to do now. He remembered that if this was him from his last incarnation, he didn't even have a girlfriend. Alma said that she had been attacked by a monster on the way here. She explained that while saving her, Ruri's sword was broken. The girl said it was her fault, so she had to find her a new sword. Matthias and Ruri were silent. Ruri's face was red with embarrassment. Alma looked back and forth at Ruri and her new acquaintance. Matthias and Ruri's faces were red. Alma realized everything. Alma started laughing. She asked why she felt such a strange atmosphere here. Ruri began to worry even more. Ruri shouted that she still wasn't engaged and wasn't dating anyone. Alma flinched in surprise. Alma asked her friend if she had been in too much of a hurry. Matthias thought she was alone, which was perfect. Baisen came out. He was holding a sword. The salesman held out the sword. Baisen gave the sword to Matthias and Alma gave the stones. Matthias thought that with the sword weighing only 300 grams, they called such a thing the lightest long blade. The hero realized that it wouldn't be possible to improve all of its characteristics, but he was going to use toughening and iron jerk. Matthias stroked the blade of the sword. He thought he needed to adjust the magic flow first. The new acquaintances looked at him with surprise. Matthias thought that now he had to merge the mana of the weapon and the stones into one. He knew that this was the basis of the theory of amplification magic. Matthias thought that these mages and smiths didn't know enough about it. He speculated that maybe that was the reason why the armaments here were in such poor condition. The hero thought that now he could get on with the main part. Matthias applied the spells Toughening and Iron Jerk. Around the hero, the hovering merged into trickles and swirled. The familiar looked up at him. Matthias held out the sword to Ruri. He said it was ready. Alma asked what was so easy. Baisen said it was incredibly fast. Ruri said that she could feel the magic circulating in that sword. Baisen asked Ruri why not try it out then. He pulled out a piece of wood. Ruri agreed. Ruri got into a stance. The girl shouted to herself that she had to move forward. She started to move towards Baisen. Matthias yelled for her to be more careful because the sword was very sharp. The sword cut the tree into 2 pieces. Ruri was very surprised. She screamed, asking what it was. The girl dropped the sword. The sword started to go into the ground. Everyone present was surprised. Ruri said that she didn't even feel it touch the log. She added that she had never seen such a thing. Alma shouted, asking that it went straight into the ground. Bei-san remained silent. All 3 of them simultaneously called out to Matthias. They shouted, asking how exactly he had perfected that sword. Matthias replied that he simply applied toughening and iron jerk. Alma shouted, asking if it was a double enhancement. Ruri said that it was a national level enhancement skill, right? She asked how he could even do that. Bei-san shouted that he would pay for everything. He asked that the hero upgrade all of his weapons in the shop. Matthias remembered that in his past life, it was normal to use 10 or 20 enhancements per piece of armament. He asked himself how backward the magic of this world could even be. In the end, he was paid 1,000 gold to improve another blade. It was quite tedious, but nevertheless, the day of his exam had come. The Second Royal Academy was the opening of the exam day. The instructor told the incoming students that they would have 60 minutes. He announced the start of the exam. Matthias sat in the front, and Alma and Ruri sat 1 row behind him. Hero thought that he hadn't studied enough. He asked himself what the art of the swordsman was according to writer. The hero asked himself why he resembled the mindless swordsman he knew in his past life. Matthias assumed that he must have been very famous here. Matthias didn't know anything about that. He figured it didn't matter, he was just going to describe this fool's usual tactics. They were outside. The applicants were about to take part in a jousting tournament. At the registration table was Yakat. She said that Ruri Arvio Roth was next. The girl shouted that she was here. The judge was Lucas. He said it was Arvio Roth's magic blade. The young man added that this fight was very interesting to him. Alma told her friend to do her best. Ruri exhaled a breath. The girl told herself to go ahead. Ruri put her sword forward and started her attack. The judge dodged her attack. He was a few steps behind in a second. Matthias said she had good coordination. Alma said that Ruri was so strong. She continued, praising her friend that both her swordsmanship and magic skills were excellent. Alma said she was proud of such a friend. The referee told her opponent that she had done a good job. Lucas added that it was his turn. He attacked Ruri. The referee asked her how about it. The judge's sword snapped in half. The opponents were shocked. Ruri thrust her sword forward. She defended herself from the opponent's blow. They didn't expect something like this. The judge continued to fight with the broken sword, but Ruri's sword chopped the broken sword into pieces. At the end, only the sword handle was left. The judge couldn't believe what had happened. He asked what it was. Yakat opened her mouth in surprise. Alma couldn't believe her eyes. Matthias thought that the judge had faced the sword with toughening and iron jerk as enhancements. He realized the implications were obvious. The judge raised his hands. He said he was giving up. Lucas continued that although he had heard that Arvio Roth's blade was good, there was no way he expected it to be this good. Ruri tried to explain how she had gotten that sword. Lucas shouted, asking her that it was something new from Bei-san. He asked that there was only 1 copy left. Lucas turned around to the front desk. Lucas turned to Yakat, asking her to borrow some money. The girl didn't know what to answer. Lucas shouted that he would buy his own sword. The judge ran out of the academy. Yakat tried to stop her colleague, but she failed. There was absolute silence in the arena. The applicants were watching all of this. One of them asked what about their exam. Yakat called the applicant's name. She said that she was a simple spellcaster. Yakot asked how she was supposed to test the art of sword fighting. Someone from the tower said to let him help them. The stranger jumped down from the tower into the arena. Yakot looked up at him. You could tell by the look on her face that she recognized him. The man placed his sword on her shoulder. Yakot shouted, asking if it was Jill-san. The entrance began to whisper that it was the real Jill. Matthias asked himself who it was. Gil started flipping through the list of applicants. He asked who would be next. The man's face changed. He called out Matthias' last name. Gil asked the hero that he was Castel's son. Matthias answered in the affirmative. He thought he had a premonition that it might have turned out that way. Jill said he still remembered the day of his testing. The man asked Matthias that he was here to test the swordsman's art as well. Matthias asked what if that was the case. He thought that perhaps he should have used the tactics his father had taught him. The man smirked. Gil yelled that he wasn't going to be soft on him. He asked Matthias if he was ready. Gil lunged to attack Matthias. The man was determined. The hero replied that he had been ready even before arriving here. He used the enhancements Physical Enhancement and Mana Hit. Matthias prepared his sword for battle. The opponents were barely visible. They were very fast. Only the sounds of swords hitting could be heard. Alma and Ruri were scared. They held hands. Ruri said that they were so fast that you couldn't see them. Gil thought that this guy was even stronger than his father. He told Matthias that he was an even bigger monster than his father. Jill suddenly attacked. Matthias barely had time to defend himself with his blade. Jill smiled widely, anticipating his victory. It was difficult for Matthias to resist such a strong opponent. Gil looked straight into Matthias' eyes. The hero thought that if he thought he was just like his father, he was seriously mistaken. Matthias coated this blade with magical power. He applied the spell lubrication with a layer of mana. The hero knew that all it needed was a slight tilt. The sword began to slide over the other sword. Gil's face changed. He asked what that was. Matthias managed to get out of the trap. Gil lost his balance and almost fell to the ground. Matthias brought his blade closer to his opponent's throat. Gil was dumbfounded. He said he was surrendering. Gil called the hero a monster. He told Matthias to say his name. Gil stood up. The hero said his name was Matthias Hildesheim. Jill said he would remember that name. He was about to leave the arena. Hero looked at him. Yakot yelled, trying to stop Jill. She asked if he had forgotten that there was an exam going on here. Gil realized that sneaking out wasn't going to work. Later, Ruri pointed her hand forward toward the target. She said the power of fire circulating in her body become an arrow and destroy the enemy in front of her. The target burst into flames. The examiner announced that Matthias Hildesheim was next. The hero thought they were testing their attack magic abilities. He told himself that it was far for him to attack. The examiner said it was the weakest mark. He told Matthias not to worry too much because he would have other tests to score. The hero replied that everything was fine. With his level 4 tag, Matthias could only use spells at a range of 10 meters. The hero thought that if he couldn't attack, then he could use something else. A huge magic circle appeared around Matthias. The examiner was also in that circle. The man was frightened. He asked Matthias what he was doing. The hero smirked. He told the examiner that he should have taken a step back. A huge fireball appeared in the hero's hand. Sounds of an explosion were heard from the academy. Because of this magic, a very strong wind arose. The examiner barely had time to cover his face with his hand. Afterwards, a huge hole was left in the place of the magic circle. The targets were destroyed. Matthias thought that since he couldn't shoot, he would just blow everything up. He said it was fine. The applicants ran to the examiner to bring him to his senses. Matthias asked himself if he'd overdone it. It wasn't like anyone had told him that he couldn't destroy the pad, he thought. Matthias thought that maybe he should have helped him rebuild it. It was night outside. Someone shouted, asking what he was going to rebuild the pad. Matthias thought it was the usual rebuilding spell. He wondered why they were all so freaked out. The Academy Council was gathered around a large table in a special room. One of them asked what was the problem with the examiner. The teacher said that his strength was amazing. The written test showed education beyond discipline. He continued that to understand the art of the writer-swordsman as deeply as he did was astounding. The teacher continued that the magic algebra test, there was a dilemma there that for centuries many professors had battled over to no avail. He said they didn't even have an inkling of a clue, but he had picked the perfect answer. The counselor replied that he had not met anyone like him since the opening of this academy. He asked that he could have been blessed by the god of magic Gaia himself. Someone else asked if they had any objections. Matthias walked around the city. He thought that the results were supposed to be announced today. The hero was very nervous. Matthias hoped he wouldn't fail this time. He figured that even though he was clueless as to what was on the test, he thought he would get a pretty decent score. Alma's voice was heard. The girl was yelling to Matthias, that's where he was. Ruri shouted, here they are, the results. The girl pointed to the booth. The applicants began to gather around. Matthias looked at the results. He thought he didn't see his name. The hero said it looked like he didn't pass. Matthias thought it was probably because he had destroyed the yard. Alma asked him what he was talking about. The girl shouted that his name was up there at the very top. She pointed to the very top line. Alma explained that they had all passed the test. She continued that now they were all in the same school. Alma offered to help each other. At the Second Royal Academy, Admission Day, the teacher addressed the newcomers. He told them to listen to him carefully. The teacher said that in this academy, talent was everything. He continued that they were different from the first academy in that here origin, age, and even the mark meant nothing here. The teacher shouted that if you didn't like someone, you had to shut them up by force. He said that the training course was available at any time. It was the head of the Second Royal Academy, Edward. The man continued that unfortunately, 10% of the students didn't survive the exam. He said that if they didn't want to repeat their fate, they needed to train and get stronger. The head shouted that they should have honed their skills. He added that that was the end of it. The apprentices were silent. Matthias asked himself that it was like the army here. One of the teachers told them to break up into their classes. Alma asked Ruri that they were so lucky. The girl said that they would all be in the same class. Ruri asked Alma not to push her. The girl almost ran into Matthias. One of the teachers pointed at Matthias. Another teacher said it was the guy with the weird results. Matthias turned his attention to them. He interrogated them. Alma asked Matthias that he hadn't seen yesterday's results yet. Matthias asked what she meant by that. Matthias's test scores were several times higher than the maximum scores. Matthias asked that there had been a typo. Ruri said that she didn't understand everything, but at least they clearly hadn't gotten it wrong in sword wielding. Alma agreed with her. Ruri continued that the one he had defeated yesterday was named Gil, and he was the captain of the Royal Guard. Matthias interrogated her. He was shocked. Matthias interjected himself that that uncle was the captain of the Royal Guard. He thought the Royal Guard would be stronger. The hero realized that if he was actually the captain, one dragon was more than enough to take over the country. The students were distributed to their classes. Alma tried to bring Ruri and Matthias closer together. She told her friend that it was so crowded. The girl asked Ruri if she could move over. Ruri blushed. She squealed. Matthias blushed a little too. Someone walked into the classroom with quick steps. The teacher opened the door loudly. The students stood up. The teacher called out to the students. It was the headmaster of the academy. He said that he would be their class teacher. The teacher suggested the students to help each other. The students started to whisper. Someone asked that he would be their class teacher. Someone asked who he was dragging behind him. Matthias thought the principal was looking out for the class. He asked himself what was the norm here. The teacher said that he thought they all knew who he was. He went on to say that since he had a lot to do, they would still have a vice principal. The teacher picked up the man he was dragging behind him. The vice class leader said hello to the boys. Matthias thought his face was swollen, so he couldn't tell who it was. The principal said that this person ran away in the middle of the exam to buy a sword, but his skills were pretty good. The teacher added that if he wasn't around, that person would take care of him. Alma said it was that judge from the exam. Ruri said that she still wanted to apologize to him. Matthias asked himself that this was how he escaped and bought a sword for 1,000 gold pieces. The principal continued that there was something else he wanted to say. He said that there was a genius among them. The headmaster turned to Matthias. He said he thought the hero knew what he was talking about. The principal pointed at Matthias and called him by name. The principal told him to come to the principal's office after class. Everyone looked at him. Matthias asked himself what that meant. Matthias was in the principal's office where all the teachers at the academy were gathered. The principal said he had come after all. He called the hero by name. Matthias answered in the affirmative. He asked himself that these were the teachers of the academy. The hero figured that 30% were regular, 40% were mages, and the remaining 30 were warriors. He thought the formation was pretty good. The headmaster told Matthias to relax. He offered the hero to help him with a couple problems on this worksheet. Lucas brought a chair over. Matthias took the sheet. He thought it was magical algebra, just like the tasks on the entrance exam. He assumed they thought he had cheated or asked someone for help. The hero assumed he had to solve it again. The teachers began to watch him closely. Matthias asked himself what was going on here. Matthias said he was done. He hoped it was enough to prove his innocence. Yakat yelled, asking if there was an even simpler solution. Another teacher asked, asking that the answers matched. The third replied, also in loud tones, that it was an ancient dilemma. They wouldn't know unless they tried it in practice. The second said that he had not seen the slightest mistake. He was interrupted by the third. He said to wait a second because he had to get some magic stones. Matthias didn't understand what was going on. The principal said he really was incredible. Matthias said, just so they know, he didn't do anything out of the ordinary. The principal said he was a little weird. Matthias thought that was rude. The principal asked if he realized how talented he was. He continued that the problem he had solved earlier was an ancient dilemma that hadn't been answered in 100 years. Matthias' eyes rounded. He interjected to the principal that it was a task that no one had been able to solve. Matthias thought that the mages of this country didn't know what magic drawing was yet. He asked himself that it meant they didn't have any normal magic swords. The hero asked himself how they even defended their kingdoms and cities. The headmaster said that it seemed like he had a lot of secrets. He continued that he wasn't going to pry into him or his friends. The headmaster shouted that, frankly, the Second Royal Academy was going to be shut down. He asked Matthias if he could lend him his power. Matthias asked why he was bringing it up so suddenly. The hero asked him why the principal of such a prestigious academy would suddenly bow his head to a student. The principal explained that as he had said earlier, talent was everything. He continued that, As such, he had asked for help. Matthias told him to bring him up to speed. The principal said that the aristocrats of the kingdom didn't like the way they worked, so they forced them to work just like the first academy. The principal continued that it was true that they were more successful than them, but they had problems in the grading criteria. He held out the papers. The man added that these were the results of a study. Matthias asked himself that this was all the research the first academy had done on spells. He thought that the second academy was looking for a way to cast spells without spells. Matthias thought it was obvious that magic without spells was useless. He wanted to say something, but the headmaster interrupted him. The headmaster shouted that the people from the consulate said that all magical research should focus on magic. He added that they didn't recognize their work. Matthias thought that meant someone was really confusing magical knowledge in this world. False magical knowledge. He remembered someone saying that the overflowing power of fire was supposed to become an arrow and kill his opponent, misunderstanding the meaning of the marks. Someone had said that this divine magic was for a select few, a mark of honor. The most important thing was the discrimination of the bearers of the fourth mark, their conditions for gaining nobility. The weakest mark gave minus 2,000 points. Matthias realized that there should have been no mistake. He thought that someone wanted to stop the development of magic in this world. The principal asked the hero that the magic he used in the entrance exam was the same magic without spells, after all. The principal said that they had to achieve that. The man continued that every year there was a tournament for the students of the two academies. The principal told Matthias that this year he was to represent the academy. He said to show his full strength. Matthias thought that sounded tempting. He suggested that maybe he would meet the one who made the world the way it was. The hero replied that he understood. He said that he had a condition. The principal said that if that was the case, he would do his best. The next day, the teacher said that here was the beginning of their magic lessons. They were in the courtyard. The teacher said that today was going to be a bit of a change. They were to use magic without spells. She added that Matthias was going to demonstrate it to them first. The students began to whisper. Someone interjected. Someone asked that it was the guy with the weakest mark, after all. Matthias realized that if the academy fell, his chance of finding someone who could challenge those monsters from the universe had to be destroyed. His condition was to arrange magic lessons without spells. Matthias said that now he was to ask the teachers to hold the targets for him. The teachers obeyed him. One of the teachers began to recite a spell. He said to let the magic gather in his hands and raise these objects to the sky. The targets began to float in the air. Matthias used physical amplification. He began to take off and rose higher and higher. Alma asked as he jumped up. She asked that it was magic too. The students looked at him with admiration. Matthias gathered mana into his sword and was going to hit all the targets. Tongues of flame surrounded him. Matthias was serious. The hero created fireballs that flew in different directions. The fireballs destroyed the targets. The students watched all of this and were surprised. Matthias landed softly on the ground. The fire around him began to disappear. The hero said, "Somehow it did." He returned his sword to its scabbard. The students opened their mouths in surprise. Yakat hummed something. Matthias told them that now it was their turn to try it. The students started to get indignant. Someone shouted that fire magic, body enchantment, and after that gravity, it was all unbelievable. Another student shouted that even his brother, who was in the royal guard, couldn't do that. A third asked that this guy had demons in his lineage. Matthias thought it was the first time he'd ever been told that. Yakat said they were familiar with the feeling. Another teacher said that the first time he saw it, he thought there was something wrong with his eyes. He added that he even went to the hospital. Matthias asked himself what they were even talking about, and what was all the glitter around. Matthias asked himself if demons existed in this world. In his past life, they had brought so much trouble that they had exterminated them all. He supposed they weren't all extinct here yet. Jocket said she thought that, however, spellless magic wasn't just Matthias' domain. She adjusted her glasses. Jocket called out to Gezar-sensei. The man stepped forward. One of the students said he thought it was a warrior at first. Gezar-sensei told them to behold his new weapon. The man released a small fireball at the target. His eyes lit up. Gezar-sensei continued to create fireballs and launch them at the target. He asked Matthias if he had seen this. The man was pleased with himself. Matthias asked himself what he meant by seeing it. He thought it was even worse than terrible. The students were ecstatic. Someone shouted that the teacher had destroyed the target with only 4 hits. Matthias thought they really were delighted. Jocket said that Gezar-sensei had only practiced for 24 hours. Jocket continued that now they had to start with basic fire magic. The students practiced. Some asked for advice from another. Some tried on their own. Alma repeated that he had to feel the flow of magic. She succeeded in creating a small flame. The girl called out to Matthias. She told him to watch because she had succeeded. Matthias said she didn't have to scream like that. Alma looked at him with a menacing look. Matthias asked Ruri how she was doing. The girl replied that she was sorry, but she still wasn't making it. Ruri added that it had been so hard. Alma said that Ruri had been practicing magic every day, so it was a little hard for her to transition to magic without spells now. Matthias said to himself that the students seemed to have adapted to this kind of magic faster than that teacher. Ruri started to scream. Alma asked what was wrong. Ruri replied that she had run out of magic. The girl collapsed to the floor. Matthias noticed this. He said he would share it with her then. The hero told Ruri to hold out her hand. Ruri grabbed Matthias' hand with both hands. Their gazes crossed. Both blushed with embarrassment. Ruri said thank you. Matthias replied that it was nothing. They continued to look at each other, but they hadn't let go of their hands yet. Matthias thought that only one hand was needed. Ruri said she could feel the magic flowing into her. The girl said, transmitting magic that way. Matthias complimented that anyone could do that. He explained that there was some difficulty in controlling the amount of it. One could transfer too much magic. Ruri said that she understood. Matthias said to himself that he seemed to be healing as well. He thought that even though his magic was rapidly decreasing. Ruri raised her fists. The girl said enthusiastically that she seemed to have realized something. She stretched her hand forward and light began to pour from her mark. Ruri created a huge ball of fire. Ruri explained that she had done it. She thanked Matthias. The girl gave Matthias an embarrassed look. The hero replied that there was no problem. Matthias knew that Ruri's magic was stronger than many in the class. He thought it might have been because of her marking level, or maybe because she practiced hard every day. Matthias was approached by the teachers. They were up to no good. Some of the teachers asked about the magic he had just passed on to her. Other teachers asked to share magic with them as well. Matthias was embarrassed. Ruri said that it was only because of his strong magic that she had succeeded. The teachers heard this. They started pushing Matthias with even more eagerness. The hero didn't know where he should have hidden himself. Eventually, Matthias told them to fall in line. He agreed to share the magic. Ruri asked Matthias if he was okay. The hero replied that he was exhausted. Matthias asked himself that wasn't now a good time to tell them. Hero called out to the girls. He said that he had something he needed to tell them. Matthias turned to the principal. He said that besides learning magic without spells, he had something else he wanted to ask for. Matthias said that he felt that there was a dungeon nearby that was reacting to his magic waves. The hero added that he needed permission to enter it. Matthias realized that there was a chance that this dungeon was only inhabited by weak monsters. His search magic couldn't see anything else, but even if he was of average size, there would still be something valuable in there. The headmaster interrogated Matthias. He laughed. The man asked what he had said about Eslado. The director crossed his arms over his chest. He explained that it was meant for second graders who were required to go there to prepare for actual combat. Matthias asked that the objective was to find magic stones as quickly as possible, wasn't it? The headmaster hesitated for a moment. He replied that only a group of 5 could go in there now. Matthias thought he wouldn't have been let in alone. He realized that it was understandable. If he went there alone, it could be very difficult to fight and collect trophies while facing a large number of monsters. Besides, if one rested without sentries, there was a high chance the monsters could quickly find and kill. The headmaster said that if 3 people passed the test, he would let them go. Matthias realized that his persuasion skill, honed in his previous life, would be needed here. Matthias said that was the whole story. The hero called the girlfriends by name. Matthias asked if they wanted to form a group with him and take over the dungeon together. The catacombs were underground caverns that stored a huge amount of mana. It was understandable why the demonic creatures dwelled here. There were many magic stones here. It was also a convenient place to practice fighting demonic beasts and could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. To compete with the first school and the first step towards defeating these monsters in the universe, the hero wanted to train this company. Maddie took the key and opened a medium-sized underground hall called Eslado. The huge gate to the dark dungeon opened, and the guys suggested to continue their journey. Alma thought that passing the test and getting into the dungeon was a pretty big deal. Maddie figured they'd been practicing magic without reading spells for a week now. He told the girls that they were both already well versed in spellless magic. Previously, Alma and Ruri had practiced their spells together on the training ground. The girls had eventually qualified for this dungeon, which they were very happy about. Maddie thought it was his turn now and activated his mark on his arm, but the examiner asked him to stop. He explained that the guy had already passed, so he didn't need to take any tests. Swordsmanship magic, it didn't matter what to test, but Maddie passed everything. The hero felt kind of embarrassed, but decided to let it go. Alma thought that Ruri was pretty good, but she would like to know Maddie's opinion of her. The girl thought that Maddie-kun should have teamed up with someone with either a stronger mark than her. Ruri was in agreement with her, and said that her mark was low, and she wasn't suited for close combat. The boy replied to the girls that it was fine. He thought that the honor mark was useless in combat anyway. It was better suited for mana accumulation, and for them to have one such person on their team was enough. Ruri wanted to make sure that was really true. The boy replied that it was unfortunately true, at least for reinforcement in battle, but the honor mark was very limited. She was a spell casting specialist, but when it came to reinforcement, she didn't have the likes of her. Ruri's eyes sparkled with happiness. The boy didn't understand what made her so happy. The girl exclaimed that they had no regrets, because it was very cool. Maddie assumed that she wanted to specialize in enhancing magic instead of the art of combat. Ruri confirmed this and said that if she honed that skill, she didn't have to have combat skills. Apparently, she liked it a lot. The guy remembered that he had even reincarnated in order to obtain a different mark. In any case, he would teach the bearers of the first tag how to improve weapons, and this was a good chance for him. Alma had the second type, and it was a regular mark. Maddie suggested that in that case, she try her hand at archery. Alma recalled that she used to be very good at shooting, but she didn't use a bow anymore. The hero didn't understand the reason and asked about it. Alma replied that a bow without arrows was useless and arrows were not as accurate as magic. It was handy for hunting, but not for combat. That was what everyone said, so she left it alone. But the hero thought that whoever said that was a fool. Actually, for Alma's mark, the bow was the best option. Alma was happy about this turn of events. The second mark specialized in strength. If she put a lot of magic into her bow, it would carry a lot of power. His fourth mark was suited for close combat, and it was the perfect combination. He would be in front, and Alma would cover from a distance. The first type of Ruri would be an aid of the whole team. Everything was balanced, and they were the perfect team in this case. Alma was already regretting not bringing her bow, and said it was a real pity. Maddie asked her to hand him her sword, and he would make a bow out of it. Alma marveled that such a thing was possible. The hero replied that they had no choice. After a while, using his magic, the hero created a weapon for her and asked her to test it. He gave the bow to the surprised Alma. She still couldn't believe that Maddie had really done it. The girl fired her weapon with terrible force and shattered the stone. The boy smiled and thought that one shot was equal to one kill. Alma had obviously practiced a lot. She looked rather agitated now. Maddie assumed she didn't like the bow. He had made it small, so it would be more comfortable in the dungeon environment. But the girl was actually impressed. She didn't understand how such a small bow could contain so much power, and it seemed too strange to her. Maddie thought that it was indeed slightly better than the ones they sold at the market. True, he didn't know much about bows in this world, but so far, the Alma liked it all. In that case, the hero took the torch in his hands and motioned for them to move on. Lucas told the boys that they would definitely die if they were caught off guard, so everyone needed to be ready. The girls agreed with him and prepared their weapons for battle. But the hero thought that there might not have been that strong of critters here in a dungeon like this. Maddie smirked and noticed that one of those was already here. Alma grabbed her head and asked where it was. She was shocked at her inattention, but Ruri hadn't noticed anything either. It was the same with Lucas. The guy answered the guys that they just hadn't felt it yet. One of the monsters was around the corner in front. Maddie should have taught the boys passive search before going down into the dungeon, but it was too late. The hero ran forward and said he would catch him. Alma asked the Maddie to stop, but no sooner had she said it than the guy was on his way back with his prey in his hands. The hero showed the girls a spiky creature that looked like a stone crab. The girls tearfully grabbed each other's hands and screamed that it was a demon. Lucas was scared too and assumed that the guy was holding a demonic beast in his hands. It didn't matter what the beast looked like outwardly. It was stronger than normal animals, so even creatures of that size could hurt them. Lucas replied that other than the baddie, no one else was allowed to catch them with their bare hands. Alma sighed heavily and said that they obviously couldn't do that even if they wanted to. Maddie replied that they could use it for practice anyway. He suggested that Alma try to shoot him. Alma said that its hide was tougher than stone, and in all likelihood her arrows wouldn't hurt it. The boy placed the creature on one of the rocks and replied that it was fine. Alma drew the bowstring and agreed with him. She took aim at the monster, after which she released her arrow. Her arrow crashed into the monster at a wild speed before flying off to the side and breaking. Alma pointed to her arrow like a little kid and said with pouty cheeks that that was exactly what she meant. Maddie understood and asked for some mana this time. Alma didn't understand what he meant. The guy replied that when she attacked with magic, she should have focused her mana into arrows. Alma still didn't understand what he was talking about, but the Maddie insisted that she should just do it. The girl agreed to try and focused her magic into an arrow. Thanks to the mana, her body along with her weapon began to glow. Her arrow flew at full speed into the target. Lucas along with Ruri watched the outcome with interest. Everything happened just as Maddie had said it would. Her arrow easily pierced the heavy target through and through. That stone crab shattered into tiny shards, and the shocked Alma thought she was being laughed at. A happy Ruri hugged the Alma and explained that it was just incredible. It was exactly what she had expected from her friend. The hero explained that it was a magical enhancement called Basic Magical Enhancement. Ruri's sword was improved in strength and sharpness. It could easily cut through the shell of a Yadakari crab. Knowing this, she could safely fight with a regular sword anywhere and anytime. It had to be good for close combat. Using his magic, the hero pulled out many more arrows and offered Alma a try. Now she could improve on all of these arrows. It was basic magic, so with frequent practice, she would get used to it quickly. Alma was confused and asked Maddie where he got all these things. The guy replied that he took them from his magic storage. The girl didn't know what to say to that, so there was an awkward pause between the heroes. Alma assumed he was talking about mythical storage magic. To the hero, this was not surprising. He didn't see it as mythic if it worked. He had defeated a tiger of war on the way to the capital and left it in his magical storage, which took half of his mana. It was just terribly inconvenient. Alma grabbed her head when she heard about the tiger of war. She explained that it was a demonic beast of rather high level. The girl prepared to fall over on the spot, but then apologized. She felt guilty for expecting something normal from Maddie. But the hero smiled and said that Alma could do it too. She could quickly defeat a magical beast of the same level as a tiger of war. Alma found that hard to believe. She looked at Maddie skeptically, but Maddie didn't doubt it. He told the others that this was a pretty great place for all of them. The guys didn't understand what he meant, and the hero replied that this was where the monsters dwelt. The girls clung to each other fearfully again when they heard about the monsters. They were in a real monster dwelling. In this dungeon, there is a place with a high mana level. If someone enters here or there is a mana release, the mana will form magic stones and create monsters. Maddie turned to Lucas and suggested that they start. Alma didn't understand where he wanted to start. She was even more startled by Lucas' positive response. Lucas smiled and replied that they were safe with Maddie, and to test themselves with these monsters would be a very interesting experience. Maddie said that they had made up their minds and asked about the girl's availability. Alma buckled her knees fearfully and asked if he really meant it. Maddie threw the stone with all his speed into the distance, but Alma covered her eyes and asked him to wait because she was not mentally ready for it. His stone just landed on the ground, and for a moment everything was silent. The girls looked around frightened and heard someone approaching them. From the darkness, the glittering little eyes of many monsters began to peer out at them. The boys spotted many stone crabs and warned the boys that they were on their way. Countless crabs ran at the frightened girls, who screamed in fright. Maddie admitted that there were a lot more of them than he thought. They were lucky to meet so many monsters here at once. Lucas was beginning to doubt that they would be okay, though on the bright side, they had Maddie. Ruri looked at Alma hopefully. Alma had already prepared her bow and said that all they had to do was fight, since the Maddie had taught them. The girl focused her mana on her arrow and shot at one of the crabs. Her arrow immediately pierced through the target. The terrified Alma screamed that she could only kill one at a time, but she didn't have time to deal with the rest. Maddie told her to calm down and back off when firing, then focus on the nearest targets. Alma didn't think that was a good idea, even if she listened to Maddie. It didn't matter to the girls how much they killed, because there were still plenty of monsters here that had already gotten close enough to them. Maddie replied that with their current statuses and with such opponents it was fine. Alma asked not to mess around and help them deal with them. Maddie agreed with her and warned her that he was on his way to them. With the help of his magic seal, the guy flew high up above the heads of the surprised girls. In midair, he activated his seal and summoned a multitude of explosive balls. He rained down magical projectiles on the ground, disposing of a whole horde of enemies. In an instant, Maddie had dealt with all of them and said it was their victory. Alma couldn't believe her eyes, for he had disposed of them in just one blow. Ruri covered her mouth from being so shocked. Lucas clutched his head and thought that this guy was really a monster. Maddie spread his hands and said that for the next month, both of them would have to practice hard to kill these things with ease. With tears in her eyes, the Alma asked not to think it was something they could do. Ruri also doubted that with their abilities, they could do it in 1 month, but Maddie replied that it was completely realistic. As soon as they were done, they would start basic magic enhancement. Ruri promised that she would try her best and learn all the magic enhancements perfectly. Alma also promised to try and said that if her bow could become more powerful, she would do anything for it. The hero was happy to see their determination. All of this was great, and Maddie suggested they hit the road. From then on they practiced magic without reading spells to improve their melee skills. And a month later, the girls were really starting to get the hang of it. They returned to the monster abode. Now the girls could take down all those stone crabs by themselves. Edward then decided to tell the students who would represent their school in the battle competition. The students were curious about Edward's decision. Of course, they would be the leader of the group, a freshman from Class A named Maddie. He would be joined by a freshman from Class A named Ruri and a freshman from the same class, Alma. The 3 of them will represent their school in this year's competition. The students didn't realize how these freshmen would represent them. Especially they chose 2 girls and a guy with the lowest mark. The students thought that their Mr. Headmaster had given up after 33 failures and asked them to give them a chance. The students started to make noise, but the headmaster ordered them to be quiet. Edward said that he had no intention of losing in this competition. On the contrary, he was convinced that this year they would win. The students were completely confused. He asked for permission to demonstrate his skills to the children and asked Yagato-sensei to move on to goal number 1. The woman understood and stepped forward. Ruri was the first to go to the targets for the demonstration and activated her mark. She ordered her to approach her and fired her hand towards the targets. Her powerful shot turned into a huge explosion. All the students were confused and didn't understand how she could take down all 3 targets at once. No one could believe their eyes. Ruri could be of the same level as the students of the first school who had the honor mark. Edward smiled and said that wasn't all. Yagato-sensei conjured the next targets. This time it was Alma's turn to demonstrate her skills. She was given targets that stood strictly behind each other. The girl picked up her bow and took aim for a shot. She poured mana into the arrow and released it with stunning speed. As a result, her arrow easily overcame all the targets and flew forward. The arrow flew into the ground at a wild speed. The students stared at the arrow in shock. They had heard that the school had recently opened a new class, but for some reason all the newcomers were such monsters. No one realized looking at these kids who they were. Maddie smiled and walked over to the girls. Edward wanted to hear any objections. Maddie's strength was the best part, but he didn't see the fun in showing it off right here. Edward cheered everyone present and explained that they would definitely be champions at this year's competition. Everyone supported the headmaster and raised their hands in the air. The long-awaited day of the competition, which was held in the capital's arena, had arrived. The people present were already betting that the Second Academy would be destroyed as always. But His Majesty somehow thought that this year would be different. Edward, the principal of the Second Academy, told him that he had 2 little surprises in store for them. Ruri admitted that she was getting nervous when she saw so many people outside. Alma smiled and replied that they had nothing to worry about, since Maddie was with them. Ruri thought they could only manage if the children gifted with magic didn't show up here. It sounded like some kind of strange title to the Maddie. Until now, they had been close to victory for several years in a row, but the First Academy was suddenly fielding insanely strong opponents. Their strength was simply unbelievable, which was why they were nicknamed children gifted with magic. Alma heard that the former captain of the Capital Royal Legion of Magic was also one of them. Maddie used his magical sense. It looked like what she said was true, and these kids were gifted. This kind of magical reaction showed that they were just monsters. But there was a smile on the Maddie's face, not fright. Ruri assumed it was coming from the waiting room of the First Academy. They felt a powerful and unusual wave of power. Alma felt it too and became nervous. Compared to Maddie, these guys could really be called monsters. After a month of training, the 2 of them had finally mastered magical sense, and apparently they too could pick up this unusual magic. This magic was at least 10 times stronger than Maddie. So instead of monsters, the hero could characterize them as demons. Maddie thought for a moment, after which he asked the girls to listen to him. If his arguments were correct, the leader of the enemy team was very dangerous. Therefore, once they defeated the other 2 opponents, they had to run as far away as possible and leave the rest to him. Ruri said that the arena had a magical barrier. There was a high chance that it would collapse during the battle. The source of this guy's magic was much stronger than Maddie. Alma thought that it was simply impossible, since no human could reach that level. Maddie scared the girls to death by saying that he was not human. The host warned the audience that the time had come and asked the contestants to proceed to the arena. Their melee was about to begin, and the contestants had to take their assigned positions. Maddie and Alma came out with smiles on their faces, but Ruri was clearly nervous. The audience laughed out loud when they noticed that this guy had a disqualification tag. In their opinion, the Second Academy dared to send this piece of trash here as their representative. But the students of the Second Academy only supported them with all their might, and asked them to kick 1 seat to the guys from the First Academy. Maddie saw the opponents appear in front of them. When the 2 teams came close together, the referee made sure they were ready. The leader of the enemy team grinned at Maddie and said confidently that there was nothing to prepare for. He said that these honorable representatives of the First Academy could easily destroy these squishies even without warming up. Compared to them, Maddie's team did look rather weak, but Maddie was confident. The referee explained that the 65th National Academy battle match was starting. The disciples of the First Academy used the power of fire that moved within them. They simultaneously pointed their hands at their opponents. Maddie's group came into motion. The hero called out to Ruri and Alma, and the girls realized everything. The 4th mark was designed for close combat, which meant the hero needed to get closer. He was going to conceal his presence by using the 2 attacks as a distraction. That was his cunning. At the same time, Ruri along with Alma simultaneously attacked with their magic. The attack was rapidly approaching the enemies, but they just stood still. Their team leader didn't even notice as the girl's swift attack blasted the targets around him. His partners were clearly hit hard by their attacks and couldn't even block them. All the spectators stared at the fight in shock, not expecting such a turn of events. The head turned pale in bewilderment. He didn't understand how they used magic without spells. Instead of worrying about his comrades, This guy was focusing on spellless magic, which seemed rather interesting to Matty. The referee yelled out that the Leeches and Jaws had been defeated. Only 5 seconds of the match had passed, and the First Academy had already lost 2 of its members. The head of the team went into a rage and, activating his magic, shouted that they were just small, insignificant squishies. He didn't understand how they dared to do this, and was going to avenge his comrades. Matty noticed that he was getting serious and asked the boys to focus and dodge his attacks. The enemy's magical attack rushed towards the girls. Ruri and Alma took each other's hands and decided to get down to business. They activated physical enhancement magic and avoided the attack by jumping high up at wild speeds. The referee asked the audience to watch this damage. As expected of a Devilius, he was a child gifted with magic after all. He could easily defeat the enemies alone as well. Matty praised the girls for their good work and asked them to leave the rest to him. The girls understood and hurriedly left the battlefield. No one expected the girls to just take and run to the waiting corridor. The referee explained that Ruri and Alma from the Second Academy had left the battlefield and deserved to be disqualified. The spectators laughed when they saw them run off and told Devilius that it was all on him now. The panting girls looked back toward the arena. Alma caught her breath and said they were counting on Matty. Meanwhile, Devilius was looking around, trying to find the guy with the 4th mark who had disappeared. But Matty was right behind his opponent's back and told him he was already here. Devilius noticed Matty draw his sword and hurried to dodge. With the help of his magical seals, he jumped high up and evaded the surprise attack. Matty smirked and asked the guy why he wasn't casting spells. Devilius moved to attack with insults and used fire towards Matty. Matty jumped aside and avoided a powerful blast right in front of his nose. He thought it was hilarious that his opponent could use magic without spells. Apparently, Devilius didn't like it at all. Now everything was falling into place. Those who popularized magic without casting spells were demons. They wanted to weaken humanity and create terrible difficulties for those who carried the 4th mark. They did not want humanity to realize the power of the 4th mark. The reason for Matty was simple. Their biggest weakness was fighting against people with a disqualification mark. In the case, the heroes suggested to see how strong the demons of this world had become. The boy poured his mana into the blade of his sword and used a strike. Devilius couldn't believe his eyes and didn't understand how such a thing was possible. Matty's opponent was confused as the heroes swiftly approached him. In his haste, he was about to repel his blow with a firestorm. The fire tornadoes swirled around the Matty, but the hero was nowhere to be seen. The girls were frightened for Matty. The judge exclaimed that it was amazing. Devilius summoned a huge firestorm that surrounded Matty. He is truly a genius at magic. Everyone was left to see if Matty could handle the challenge. The hero smirked when he realized that his opponent was going to suppress him with fire. The opponent didn't want to let the 4th marker anywhere near him. The basic strategy was pretty solid, but the hero already had a plan. All he needed to do was to spread his magical control throughout the entire area. That way, he would be able to master his opponent's magic control as well. In his time, he had to be careful of his opponent for getting him into this situation, but given his opponent's inexperience, it was hardly necessary. Devilius was at a loss to understand why his wall of flame was starting to fade. Matty jumped out right in front of his foe's face and mockingly called him a complete embarrassment. Devilius screamed in shock, not realizing how this could have happened. The hero said that it was all the fault of his incompetence. With those words, he launched a frontal sword strike straight at his opponent, but he was stopped by a magical seal. Unfortunately for Devilius, it was only a distraction. Just as the hero thought, His opponent had used a defense spell. Now all he had to do was to use a devastating left-handed punch in earnest. The hero struck his opponent with all his might and asked for his true form to be shown from now on. None of the spectators could understand what was going on here. The spectators didn't know anything and didn't understand how this disqualified guy could have just attacked Devilius. When the smoke from the powerful explosion cleared, a simply unimaginable sight awaited everyone. Everyone opened their mouths in shock. Right in front of them was not the same Devilius. The shocked Devilius looked at his clawed hands. The onlookers screamed that it was the very real demon that was wearing Devilius armor. It simply couldn't be. Matty smirked and asked the guy what he was going to do now. The demon bared its teeth at Matty and called him a real creature. In rage, the demon grew huge wings behind his back. Matty at first thought he wanted to run away. It wasn't like he wanted to use teleportation magic, and maybe he was just going to fly away. The guy assumed his attack had weakened him pretty badly. With a demon of this level, it would only take a second and a half to release its wings. The speed of the demon's flight depended on its magic source. The human source couldn't match the demonic source, so if Matthew missed it, it would never catch up. The hero realized he had to knock him out before he took to the air. He would need the magic stone to do that. Now the magic stone had to be connected to Matty's sword. Every second counted. The guy quickly used steel cut, blast power, sharpening, and hardness reinforcements. All these spells increased the attack powers of the steel cut. In the end, the hero only had 0.7 of a second left. With such a powerful magic connection, his sword would soon disintegrate. Based on Matty's calculations, it would happen in 2 seconds. But that wasn't a problem, as he only had 0.7 of a second left before he would take off. That was more than enough time. In addition, the hero had already used most of his strongest spells. It included Mana Strike, Steel Slash, and Sharpening. His sword contained 7 spells and 5 different types of magic. Now Matty was going to see how he would handle it and swung his sword for a strike. Devilius was about to take off, and in a rush, he looked back to see the whole situation. Before the demon could blink an eye, the Matty gave him a massive sword strike to his body and stopped him. Devilius opened his mouth, from where a powerful stream of blood gushed out. Everyone froze in bewilderment and silently waited for the end of this unpredictable fight. Ruri and Alma also froze with excitement. From the force of the blow, the blade of Matty's sword began to crack and eventually shattered. The demon fell to the ground behind the guy's back, bleeding out. The onlookers couldn't believe their eyes. They assumed that the Devilius was dead, but they didn't understand how this guy single-handedly put down the demon. People assumed that this was the same rookie who had defeated the captain of the Royal Guard. Undoubtedly, His Majesty now needed to quiet this matter as soon as possible. Since the demon had appeared in the royal capital, a lot of trouble would follow. The king was surprised by such a small surprise from Edward, but surely it couldn't be called small anymore. He thought that using all 7 spells at once was probably overkill. It was a pretty easy victory for him. With these thoughts, Matty threw away the hilt that was left of the broken sword. Still, it was clear that demons were hiding in the Royal Academy. It looked like the current situation in this world was quite serious. Matty needed to come up with a plan to make sure that the human race wouldn't disappear before he became stronger. He had no doubt that there were demons like him in the capital. At that moment, he was called out by Ruri. Ruri suddenly swooped down on the hero with tears and hugged him. This suddenness made Matty's cheeks turn red. She wanted to make sure he was alright and asked if he was hurt. Alma called out to Ruri and said that was too impertinent. Ruri stared with her eyes glistening with tears at the Matty, blushing even more. The girl abruptly stepped aside and exclaimed that that wasn't what she meant at all. The guy pretended to fix his bangs to hide his redness and embarrassment. Either way, he was glad everything was all right. A couple days later, the principal of the Second Royal Academy, Edward, along with the current winner of the Maddie, came to His Highness Hall for an audience. The king smiled and told Edward that they were friends, so they did not need to be so formal. Edward could not afford it, for he was the ruler of this state. The hero had already realized that the king himself was in front of him. In his past life, many kings had visited their home. The king told Maddie that he had done this country a great favor by defeating that demon. He usually bestowed the title of nobleman on such occasions. The boy replied that he had absolutely no need for any title of nobility, that he had been reborn to fight, and would not sit still and look after a small piece of land for anything in the world. The king said that the news of the demons could cause chaos among the people, so he thought of something. He told the boys that they didn't need any territories. Instead, the king offered them a magic sword. He had just gotten a high-quality sword enhanced with 2 spells. Maddie was clearly becoming interested in this. The king replied that he found it in the forge. The owner said that the sword was made by a small boy. In fact, the thing was completely useless. The hero thought that Ruri would be able to enchant the weapon much better soon. The king realized that the hero was not interested and grinned. He assumed the guy might have had some specific wish and wanted to know about it. If Maddie remembered correctly, it should have been answered that he appreciated his kindness. However, the king would continue with something in his plan. This time Maddie decided to take the bull by the horns. He said that he wished to access the dungeon resources of this kingdom. The king clarified that he was talking about demonic beasts and the magic stones that were in their nests. Maddie agreed and said that of course he didn't plan on taking everything for himself. Dungeon resources were usually of incredibly high quality. They exceeded even the best gold deposits in degree, and magic stones and materials extracted from demonic beasts are the main cause of wars between nations. In the hero's past life, the answer to such a request would have been a refusal, but in this world, mankind's knowledge of high-level possessions was practically zero. Therefore, they did not realize the importance of the dungeon. The king saw no reason to refuse him and gave his permission. Maddie was very happy with the king's decision. He thanked His Highness from the bottom of his heart. In addition, the king had something he wanted to ask of Maddie. He said that 4 children gifted with magic were missing, and among them was a former Magic Legion captain named Elhart. The boy was surprised to hear such news. The magically gifted children had turned up many years ago. It meant that demons had gotten into this kingdom a long time ago. It all made sense to the hero. Demons have a very small chance to procreate, because in his past life, humanity had almost exterminated them. It seems that despite such a span of time, they still had a problem with it. Since they weren't strong enough, they decided to mix with humans and spread completely false information about magic and its use. This explained the current state of affairs. The hero realized that this was all very bad. The guy replied that if all those demons escaped, it only meant one thing. They no longer felt that they needed to deceive people. The king already realized what all this meant and jumped to his feet. Maddie was about to confirm his worst guess. The king's face turned pale with fear. It was clear to them that the demons were now gathering their forces for a full-scale attack on this country. The protagonist and the king learned that the demons were gathering their forces to plan a full-scale invasion of the kingdom. Everyone was horrified when they learned of this news. In Maddie's opinion, the demons as a race as a whole were in chaos. It would take them a lot of time and effort to prepare and train. If they were preparing for a large-scale attack, their training would take about 3 months or so. The king took his head and said that 3 months would be too short for them to do anything. Edward turned to His Majesty and said that he would swear to give his life to defend this kingdom. The hero asked the two to relax and said that their decision was simple. All they had to do was to put up a huge barrier. They had to prepare a strong and durable magical barrier. The king assumed he was talking about some new kind of holy spell. Matty wasn't sure if it was holy or not. To form a medium-strength barrier of such a large radius to cover the kingdom would require the power of everyone in the Second Academy. Even so, it would take a month to set up. The king had asked for this, and not to worry about it. He would make sure that everyone in the First Academy and the Royal Magic Knights would help with the preparations, and asked what materials were needed for this barrier. The guy replied that they would need a 60-centimeter magic stone, 10 kilograms of orichalcum and adamantite, and another 1.5 tons of mithril. Apparently, it was so complicated that the king sadly lowered his head and sighed heavily. Edward replied that they didn't have that size of magic stones in stock. They only had a couple dozen kilograms of mithril for the entire kingdom. As for orichalcum and adamantite, those materials were considered national treasure, and so they didn't have much of it either. If they collected those materials from everyone, they wouldn't get more than 3 kilograms. Matty Midley cursed and thought that in this underdeveloped age, a 60-centimeter magic stone was probably too much. He asked not to worry about it, and promised to find sources and gather materials on his own. The king didn't understand how such a thing was possible. After all, he was talking about tons of mithril. He didn't understand how he could talk about it so easily. The king said that it was impossible for them, and most likely not even for all of humanity. His Majesty asked Edward if they could count on this child. Edward replied that in his case, everything unimaginable turned out to be true. Besides, a 12-year-old boy had single-handedly defeated a demon, and that was not something an ordinary person could achieve. The king agreed with his words, and smirked. It was as if the elders couldn't do anything about it, and so they would rely on the baddie. Then His Highness would leave the demon defense training to the Matty. Matty was happy to hear that. The hero replied to His Highness that he would do it with pleasure. After this conversation, the protagonist was shown their treasury. They had more than just barrier materials here, and if the guy found something useful here, he could take it. Matty thanked them for their cooperation. The treasury of the kingdom was indeed full of a variety of expensive items. But there wasn't exactly what the hero wanted to take here. Besides, there were some old artifacts from back in his time, but they were just children's toys or spinners. Looking around a bit, Matty spotted one interesting sword. It was a sword he had enchanted at the Sand Bay store. Matty didn't understand what he was doing here. The soldier smiled. He had already guessed that this sword would catch his attention, and said that it was a legendary sword especially for a hero. But the guy frowned and said that there was no way he would use it. Walking a little further, the guy noticed another interesting item. This time it attracted him much more than this sword. The soldier said it was an old artifact found in ancient ruins. No one knew exactly how it was supposed to be used. Matty touched it and noticed that it had the amount of magic was just perfect. The hero had made this item in his past life. This thing increased the combat abilities of the first cross. One swing, and he could destroy an entire castle, but this item absorbed a huge amount of energy. It would take Matty about 50 years for him to activate it. Nevertheless, he was going to take this particular one. It was more than enough to use as the base of the barrier. It was much stronger than orichalcum. The soldier was puzzled that the hero was going to take this small sword. In addition, the guy noticed one pendant that was in the box. This pendant was also his creation. It amazingly increased the power of the wearer for a short period of time. This accessory was simply made for him. The next day, Edward told the students of the second academy that they only had 3 months to train under the slogan of "Become Stronger or Die." All the students took it very seriously and tried their best. After that, the protagonist and the girls also began their trek to gather all the materials. That was why they were going to the dungeon now. Going down first, Maddie told the girls that they would be going down to the second floor today. After a while, they reached the second floor of the Aslato Labyrinth, where the high canyons were located. Ruri and Alma opened their mouths in surprise when they saw such an unusual place. They couldn't even believe that it was really a dungeon and that this whole place could be located down underground. The guy smiled and replied that in a dungeon, everything depended on the floor, from the surroundings to the level of monsters. That was why it was the best place to train. He asked Alma to lend him her bow as he wanted to teach her something. The girl didn't mind and held out her weapon. The boy drew the bowstring. He aimed the arrow straight at the Alma, who was horrified. The pale girl closed her eyes and screamed that she was being killed. Maddie released the arrow at the Alma with a smile. Alma had already closed her eyes and covered her face with her hands to avoid being hit, but the arrow flew upwards in a strange way. The confused Alma wanted to know what had happened. The hero explained that it was an enchantment called Controlled Chord. After the Alma released the arrow, she had to concentrate and connect it to the mana flow. This method allowed her to turn the arrow in any direction, and also this way she could hit multiple targets with one shot. The hero noticed a few small galloping monsters in the distance. He suggested that Alma try to kill them with one shot. The girl focused her mana on her weapon and tried to concentrate on killing 2 monsters at once. As she concentrated, Alma released an arrow, but it curved and flew past the monsters. The little monsters bounced off to the sides in fright. Maddie said she missed and suggested she try again. Ono tried with all her might to work her arrow with her mind. The arrow did indeed curve and flew towards the monsters. But Alma was frustrated, for the beast simply dodged her arrow. Maddie advised her to concentrate more on the trajectory when her target was moving. It was hard, so Alma would need more practice to get the hang of it. The monster levels on this floor were a little higher than the ones on the first floor, so she could just practice nearby to start. Alma understood and promised to give it her best. Ruri was excited about something and kept looking at the hero. She was impatient to know what the Maddie could advise her. Ruri suggested that it was her time to use enchantment magic, but Maddie replied that it was too soon for her. Ruri was saddened by that answer, but Maddie decided to cheer her up. He said that she could procure some materials for the enchanted one. Technically, it could be considered part of the process. The girl got excited when she heard that and promised to give her best. Judging by her reaction, the guy realized that Ruri really liked enchanting. The hero said that they would need equipment to start with. In other words, a smelter. Ruri sighed heavily as she remembered blacksmithing and assumed it would take her years to train, and they also needed ore. Maddie said they were only practicing, so they wouldn't need anything except ore. The guy thought they were somewhere around here and prepared to attack. Ruri looked at him in surprise, not understanding what he meant. The guy smirked and said that it was here, then used a devastating strike. His destructive strike triggered a few monsters nearby that jumped out of the rocks and scared the Alma. Ruri tried to cover her face with her hands from the strong blast and dust flying into her eyes. The walls of the dungeon were most often made of raw steel, so it contained a large amount of metal. It was the perfect material for remelting. Ruri didn't understand how the hero was able to deal with the dungeon walls. They were considered one of the most intractable objects. Maddie thought they were just materials and didn't see it as a surprise. The hero smiled and asked the girl to just not think about it. She had to concentrate on the meltdown at the moment. Ruri pulled herself together and agreed. First, she had to infuse a magical flow to melt, then use water magic to cool down and restore the essence. After that, one had to use destructive power to crumble it. After all that, it was necessary to use a magnetic spell to recrystallize the pieces of essence. As far as Ruri understood, the gray was iron and the blue was mithril. Maddie confirmed this and asked her to repeat the steps. She could collect as much as she wanted. Ruri asked to rely on her and got down to business. For someone who had never done this, she was very good at it and her concentration was on par. Finally, Ruri explained that she had done it and could finally separate the two Oreos. Looking at her happy smile, Maddie marveled at her cute looks. The hero suggested moving on to the next stage and said that they now had to shape the weapon. This first required controlling the flow of magic, but first they had to mix iron and mithril together. The girl tried this but noticed that it was a bit flexible. The guy looked at her crooked blade and said that it was the first time she had done it, so she did very well. Since she had gotten pretty far, the hero suggested that she now try an enchantment spell. He pulled out some sealing papers and suggested she try fragile destruction and strengthening. Ruri was scared, for it was already a double enchantment. Maddie asked her not to worry, for she would surely be able to handle it. The girl understood and decided to try to do it. As she worked, she noticed that it was a bit tricky. She had to pay attention to some of the places Maddie pointed out. He asked her to pour a little less magic into the weapon. Ruri took the sword in her hands with a smile and said that it was apparently ready. In that case, Maddie suggested testing it with a blow to the wall. The girl gathered all her strength and struck the wall. Her sword was actually able to break through it. The girl didn't understand how her sword could just break the dungeon wall with just one strike. Ruri was shocked. After all, even national treasures couldn't do such a thing. The guy smiled and suggested that she keep trying to strengthen it. Ruri also noticed that for whatever reason, magic began to gather around them. Maddie assumed it was all because of the Alma. Meanwhile, Alma was hard at work fighting many monsters and constantly testing her arrows on them. Usually, when a monster or beast was killed, the amount of experience would increase and the magic would leave the body. Most of the time it would scatter and disappear, but thanks to this necklace, the magic aura would also be absorbed. It has a very large radius, so even the team members on the other end of the floor would feel it. To make a long story short, when a hero was wearing this necklace, they would all get twice as much experience. Ruri explained that it was amazing and walked over to Maddie to take a closer look at his necklace. The girl was thrilled that he had made it himself. Maddie, of course, didn't specify that he had made it back in a past life. After some time of hard training, Alma was able to kill 3 monsters at once with one shot. The girl stopped to catch her breath. She didn't want to lose those magic stones, so she gathered them all up. Alma thought it was time to head back. Her mood was good until she saw the Ruri. Alma opened her mouth in surprise. Ruri looked at Alma with eyes shining with delight and asked to see her work. The girl was sitting in a pile of weapons. Alma didn't understand where the guys got so many weapons from and asked Ruri a question. Alma was already starting to think about the fact that her group was going to open their own store. The next day, Alma and Maddie visited Ruri. Ruri was glowing with happiness and enthusiasm for her work. The guys were shocked when they saw so many of the many fine shiny weapons that Ruri had created. Ruri explained to the guys that the enchanting was quite fun. She even made a super light defense out of mithril and a huge pile of arrows for the Alma. The guys assumed that Ruri had stayed up all night to do this. The girl, with eyes sparkling with happiness, walked up to Maddie and said she had made the outfit for him. But her sparkle in her eyes immediately faded when the hero replied that he had already made his own. Ruri sadly lowered her gaze and said that in all likelihood he was right. Comparing his and her invention, the latter was more like childish pranks. Maddie exclaimed that none of this was true and asked to be allowed to wear everything. Eventually their group got fully outfitted and went to the dungeon. There, the heroes suggested that the girls go lower down. The girls suggested that they would go to the 3rd floor, but Maddie refused. When he told the girls that they would go to the 10th floor, Alma and Ruri fearfully grabbed each other's hands. The hero asked not to worry about it so much. He believed that they were both strong enough, and they were only lacking one thing. According to him, the girls still lacked combat experience. And from then on, they wouldn't be getting any more hints and help from Maddie. They would have to kill the monsters on the 10th floor on their own, even though it was dangerous. But it was the only way to move forward. Alma pulled herself together and offered to let Ruri do it. Ruri apparently wasn't scared either and agreed with her partner. Maddie's group approached a huge hole that seemed to have no bottom. The boy looked into the darkness and suggested they head out. To stop the demon invasion, the protagonist needed to set up a huge barrier over the capital. That's why he and the girls went down to the 10th floor of the dungeon in search of materials, as well as to prepare the whole team for the upcoming battle. And this time, they would no longer get any support from it. Ruri was nervous and warned Alma that the monsters were already advancing, but the girl had seen them herself. At first, they fought various small monsters on the 3rd floor, where the hero watched them in the distance from the mountain. He realized that they would be badly affected by the fact that he was always somewhere nearby and could help them in trouble. It was all about fighting a variety of monsters in the future. He needed them to become stronger. Thanks to his pendant, he was gaining experience without doing anything. Meanwhile, the girls were huffing and puffing over monsters that were also immune to fire magic. Maddie was constantly chasing the girls into battle. On the 5th floor, while Maddie was resting on a tree branch, the girls were fleeing a flock of birds. On the 7th floor, they had to deal with predatory plants. And on the 9th floor, they encountered strange monsters in the form of crystals. Maddie watched them fight all the time and thought that every enemy had its weaknesses. A man could always win if he could see them. At last their group had reached the 10th floor of the SSS medium complexity dungeon. Alma looked around and exclaimed that it was amazing. It really did look like they were in a real forest here. Ruri asked, looking up at the tree. There was even real fruit. Alma wanted to test the fruits for edibility and asked for Ruri's opinion. Suddenly the girls heard a noise somewhere nearby and stood with their backs to each other. They looked around at the thicket and readied their weapons for battle. The hero glanced at them from the side to see their magical mana flow. Passive detection had to be on 24/7 when one was in the dungeon. Maddie thought it was funny that they had noticed it after all. This time, the enemy would be much stronger than the ones they had encountered before. Suddenly, a torrent of powerful full-body attacks came at the girls from all sides. Ruri desperately tried to block the blows and realized what had happened. Alma spotted a dark silhouette nearby and fired an arrow at it. It turned out to be a three-eyed huge wolf that grabbed her arrow with just its teeth. Alma was shocked that he was able to stop her shot so easily. This huge wolfhound reeked of danger, and the girls were losing their confidence looking at him. Maddie noticed that the creature's speed was much faster than normal monsters. The hero knew it would be a difficult battle, but he believed that Alma and Ruri could handle it. The wolfhound decided to attack the Alma first. His speed was so swift that the beast came close to her face in a split second. Ruri was scared for the Alma and called out to her as the monster's huge clawed paw walked across the Alma. Maddie got a little nervous, for he thought the Alma had been knocked out. She was wearing the armor that Ruri had created a couple of days ago, so they could withstand an attack like that. The wolfhound went into a rage and pounced on the Alma again. This time he took a leap in her direction. The terrified Alma screamed that he was too fast and she couldn't keep up with his movements. But Ruri was not confused and created a wall of fire to separate the wolfhound and Alma. Alma was glad that Ruri came to her aid. Ruri looked determined and asked Alma to calm down. The hero was glad she came just in time. Alma was grateful to her partner for her help. The wolfhound stopped briefly in front of the wall of fire, so they needed to consider their next move. Ruri pointed her fire in the direction of the wolfhound. From the side of the Maddie, it looked like she was doing the right thing. After all, she had to limit the wolfhound's movement. With her fire, Ruri surrounded the monster from all sides. Alma activated her mark and said that now it was her turn. Her mark sparkled, after which the girl used detection. The enemy's position was now fixed, and she saw her exact target. Alma took aim and fired at the wolfhound. Her arrow was very close to the animal's head, but the wolfhound noticed it at the very last moment and dodged the attack. Ruri was shocked that he was able to dodge the Alma's arrow. Apparently, the fight was also stressing out Maddie, who was watching from the sidelines. But Alma wasn't going to give up and used controlled flight on the arrow. The arrow turned sharply and flew towards the wolfhound again. The aggressive wolf once again seized the opportune moment and grabbed her arrow with its teeth. Ruri had time to grieve as they were close to hitting it, but for some reason it didn't upset the Alma at all. A smirk appeared on her face, and the Maddie noticed some movement. Suddenly, the wolfhound noticed another arrow flying in his direction. It seemed to Maddie that this was a real surprise. She controlled the flight path of two arrows at the same time. The second arrow was aimed at the wolfhound's blind spot. The arrow struck the wolfhound's eyes. The wolf staggered to the side, and a stream of blood gushed from its wound. A joyful smile appeared on the faces of all the team members. Ruri tearfully hugged her Alma and shouted that they had done it. Maddie understood and smiled. So now she could cast magic spells right during battle. Her sense of battle was much better than Maddie thought. Alma offered a look to Ruri to see how much magical energy was here. At that moment, Maddie came down to them and said that the guys had done a great job. He said the Ruri's wall of fire was incredibly effective, and he was amazed that Alma was able to control two arrows at the same time. Alma was embarrassed and admitted that she wasn't completely sure she could do it. Ruri agreed with Maddie and said she was awesome. Maddie replied that they both did great. The quality of the charms on Ruri's arrows also impressed him. If things continued like this, it would only take them 3 months to gather all the materials they needed. It had been a tough fight for both of them, so Maddie suggested they find a place to rest. The girls agreed and admitted that the fight had made them hungry. Maddie replied that they needed to find a place to camp first. That meant they needed to find a safe enough place to recover. Finding such safe places on lower floors takes a lot of time, and sometimes it takes all the effort. Maddie thought this place looked pretty promising. The hero took a look at the small, strange, dark area that came their way and suggested they camp here. The girls were scared to tears when they heard this. Judging from this place and its aura, they already guessed what it was. In response, Maddie smirked. He told the girls that it was a monster lair. When a monster lair summons creatures, it absorbs all the magic aura in the area. That was why a captured monster lair was safer than normal places. It seemed to the hero that the wolf men were starting to gradually come out, and judging from the auras, there were about 17 of them. Alma and Ruri turned pale when they heard this. But despite their numbers, Maddie assured the girls that everything was fine, for he could handle them himself. The boy nimbly jumped out towards the monsters and ducked to the ground. Maddie used the activation on the monster's lair. The girls noticed that the auras in the neighborhood were gathering into one. They were concerned about Maddie and asked him to be more careful. The dark streams of aura thickened, after which parts of the monster's bodies were formed from them. Soon, there were at least 10 terrifying wolfhounds standing in front of Maddie's face, ready to pounce on him. Alma was horrified to count 17 wolfhounds, but to Maddie it was just perfect. Maddie wondered what he could use to take them all out in one blow. A startling thought popped into his head. The hero asked Alma to lend him her arrows. He was willing to show her several types of magical enchantment. Alma was surprised that he didn't need a bow for that, and threw her arrows to the guy. Maddie activated his mark and took one of the arrows. He said it was time to have some fun and use the piercing and controlled flight skills. The girls were shocked that Maddie used 3 arrows at once, and even without a bow. The guy said that due to the controlled flight effect, all he had to do was control them and make them hover in front of him. This was the most effective combo against a large number of opponents. The girls were shocked to see the hero's hand reach for another arrow. He ended up using as many as 7 arrows to attack. Maddie replied that it was all to bring his advantage, namely the number of arrows to the maximum. The hero reached for a couple of new arrows. The total attack power wouldn't increase, but it was very handy when he wanted to deal with multiple opponents separately. The girls couldn't believe their eyes, because Maddie had already used as many as 16 arrows. The arrows lit up in bright flashes of light. Maddie could now control as many as 17 arrows, which seemed inconceivable. When everything was ready, the hero looked at the wolfhounds and motioned for them to come closer. With his words, he provoked the monsters, who rushed at him to attack from all sides. Arrows like bullets flew out from the sides. The arrows hit the wolfhounds right in the eyes, causing them to fall to the ground and become helpless. It didn't take a minute for the entire pack of wolfhounds to be wiped out in one fell swoop. Maddie smiled and told the girls that the sweep was complete. He tried to aim for their eyes, but apparently some still missed. He should have practiced that combo more. Now they should have safely set up camp here. Looking at the girls, the hero didn't understand why they had such strange pale faces. Alma, along with Ruri, were constantly silent and looked at Maddie with round eyes, as if he was a ghost. The hero didn't understand what was wrong with them. The girls looked like they had been frozen, but there were no monsters with that ability in the area. The girls looked at each other and sighed heavily. Alma apologized for being so proud of her control with only 2 arrows, and now her eyes were open. Ruri asked Alma to keep her cool. After all, she should never have compared herself to Maddie. The hero smiled and replied that there was no difference between what he was doing and controlling the 2 arrows. He believed that soon Alma would surpass him in the art of the bow. Alma hoped he was talking about their universe now. The heroes were almost done setting up camp. Now all that was left was to infuse some of their magic and activate it. As the group poured their mana into the seal, a light shone over their heads in the shape of a large tent. Ruri assumed they were done. The hero agreed and said that now they could relax and rest. Alma wondered what the Maddie was going to do. The boy thought to take a walk around the lower floors. He wanted to find enough adamantite for a barrier, and going downstairs was the only way out. Alma asked what floor they could find this or on. If the hero wasn't mistaken, they could find some on the 25th floor. The girls, as usual, were shocked by his words. Previously, Alma had believed that the world record for passing was the 23rd floor, but not the 25th floor. Moreover, it was claimed that that group had the blessing of the Gaia, and also that group consisted of 30 people. The hero thought of the name of the god they worshipped. It was the same one he had in his past life. Their legendary swordsman bore the name of someone he knew in a previous life It seemed to the guy that there were quite a few coincidences here. But he hoped they were mere coincidences. According to Ruri, the deepest floor of this dungeon fully explored by humans was the 20th floor. They didn't know what was happening on the floors below that. But Alma said that if Matty was there, he would come back without a scratch. She believed he could beat the crap out of those strong monsters down there. Ruri grinned and asked Alma if she really thought that. Ruri knew that Matty would go even if they tried to stop him, so only asked her to be careful. Matty promised her and warned her to leave. In a split second, the hero was already very far away from the tent. Soon the guy reached the 11th floor and stopped not far from the herd of monsters. Not far from him was a herd with huge bulls. The boy knew about these animals. Rushing bulls were stronger than wolfhounds, but they were still weak. Still, he had to try to defeat them at least once. The hero decided to use his magic power to gauge how strong they were. If he killed one, he would reduce the strength slightly and try again until he knew their limit. In the end, the guy's assessment was completed, and he learned that these bulls were like nothing to him. Now he needed to get to the next floor as quickly as possible, but he had already provoked a whole herd of bulls. The hero used the magic movement enchantment to reduce the pressure and friction of the air. He didn't want to waste his strength on weak monsters and decided to just run away. Thus, it took 15 minutes to break through the dungeon alone. On the 20th floor, Matty was able to easily deal with the boar that had simply huge sharp tusks. Matty didn't even notice that he had destroyed all the wolves on the 20th floor in one sitting. The hero looked at the monsters in surprise and thought that this was the deepest floor explored by humans. The power level of this world was truly pathetic. It seemed that the demon race's plan to popularize verbal magic to weaken this world was working as intended. First of all, the monsters weren't very strong, but even if one took a wiggle, it would still take 300 wiggles just to defeat a wild boar. The hero was ready to explode if there were 300 Vigles nearby, so he didn't even want to think about it. At least on this floor, he could get a lot of mithril and adamantite if he broke the wall. Adamantite was an excellent ingredient for alloying. Just by adding a small amount of it, one could greatly increase the strength of a weapon. He definitely wanted to take some of the material. Suddenly, something interesting caught the guy's eye. He looked into a crack in the ground, from which a terrible magical energy was emanating. Matty could feel the magical power directed at him from the floor below. He was sure that not even a Vigle could defeat it, no matter how many of them gathered here. This monster was definitely one, known as the boss due to its exorbitant strength compared to the others. During his previous life, most of the groups had died due to sudden encounters with the boss. If there was any information about the boss' appearance, a group of hundreds of people would gather to destroy him. And yet, in his previous life, he could easily vaporize an entire dungeon, but now his magical powers were much weaker than even the usual mages of those times. The hero did not know what to do in such a situation, when he became much weaker than he used to be. Matty jumped into the dark pit and had already made up his mind. He used a spurt and decided to fight with his knowledge, experience, and hard work. In the deep darkness, Matty used passive detection. The floor below him consisted of many small caves and passages between them. Space was severely limited. So in order to defeat the boss, he needed to prepare a spacious place. His Type 4 tag specialized in close combat, so fighting in a limited space gave him an advantage. However, his opponent was the boss, so he needed a place to dodge. As the hero plunged downward, he suddenly spotted a flame lizard under his feet and stabbed his sword through its body as he landed. The boy smirked as he realized it was a fire lizard. In his opinion, it was much weaker than the tiger of war. Now he needed to focus on the boss and his passive detection found him. It was northwest of here, and about 80 meters away was a spacious cave. The status had been verified, and now the hero offered to begin the execution of his plan. Unexpectedly, many obstacles were revealed in his path. To begin with, he needed to take out all the monsters here, and then block unnecessary passages. He decided to tear down all the columns and walls to make sure that the place was cleared. After Matty had created a new passage and his preparations were finished, he motioned for the boss to advance. The hero stood in front of a dark, huge cave and used the provocation skill. Somewhere, the scaly-fanged face of a huge creature peeked out of the cave. Its droplet of saliva was so poisonous that it burned through the cave itself. The stalactite began to tremble, and the boy realized it had captured his attention. The monster must have reacted to the magical signal that Matty had just set using passive detection. Now the monster would come rushing straight here. There was an awkward pause. Matty tried to make sense of his own logic. According to him, the monster should have come straight here. As soon as he thought that, the wall opposite him cracked, followed by a massive explosion. Matty quickly bounced away from the wall. Covering himself with his hands from the heavy dust, Matty noticed a liquid below that was eating away at the rocks. In all likelihood, the boss of this floor was standing in front of him. It was a huge poisonous snake with sharp fangs and deadly venom. Matty smirked and said that he had put a lot of effort into making a special passage just for it so that the snake could use it. This serpent was considered extremely dangerous because of its venom. During his previous life, there was a monster called the Arc Snake. Matty noticed that the snake was about to go on the attack and became wary. The snake's huge head pierced the ground where Matty had just stood. The hero thought that this snake was really good at attacking, and he should have been more careful. The serpent would only need one strike to kill the Matty. The floor couldn't stand and melted from its venom, so the hero decided to create a magical platform to stand on. In addition, the poison was evaporating, and the air was becoming more and more contaminated as time went on. Time was not on his side, and the guy's limit would likely be 10 minutes of time. His first real battle with the newfangled Type 4 tag was getting more and more intense. He didn't have much time, but Matty was sure he would definitely have fun. He used magic enhancement, steel cut, and acid resistance, then thrust his sword into the serpent's head. As soon as the point of the sword pierced the thick skin of the serpent, the monster's pupils sharply narrowed. The serpent turned its head sharply, and Matty jumped back. He only took away one piece of the snake's scales, and it was only a scratch for it. But it was enough, as this boss is too strong, and it is not used to taking damage. Now this serpent should have seen him as a threat and lost his calm. Everything happened just as Matty had intended. The serpent snapped out of its seat, and without hesitation opened its huge maw to devour the baddie. But suddenly the serpent closed its mouth and stopped. His neck was beginning to swell and magical energy was shining through from within. Matty smirked and said that everything happened just as he had intended. The hero activated his magic inside the serpent, and then it exploded. The guy assumed it was in pain. Unlike its scales, its insides weren't that tough. But he knew the boss couldn't be defeated so easily. He wouldn't be sent into oblivion with just that one attack he'd used to kill the demon. Matty needed a lot more magical power. For battle mages, using a sword along with their special skills could also be considered as one of the spells. With the help of magic, a magic stone appeared in the guy's hand. He quickly inserted the sparkling stone into his weapon. His reinforced sword glowed with sparks, and the hero pounced with it to attack the serpent. Matty realized that if the magic stone broke, it would release highly concentrated magic and increase magical power. This power was very hard to control, but if one mastered its control, one could greatly increase their firepower. The magic flowed out of the magic stone, concentrating into his sword. Thanks to this, Matty could use a special magic enhancement. With the help of air magic seals, the hero was at the head of the serpent in a split second and sliced its neck with his blade. The serpent was so strong that it took his blow. Matty was only able to wound the neck of this huge monster. The hero assumed that one magic stone would not be enough. In that case, he had a backup. His hand dipped into the magic seal in order to pull out something new. The serpent watched his every move carefully. Matty pulled out 2 more magic stones and used a double magical enhancement. His sword once again shone with a dazzling light that flashed around lightning fast. Meanwhile, the girls had a completely different situation. With worried faces, they were gawking at something. It turned out that they were looking at the wolfhound, who was also staring at them. Alma asked Ruri if the monsters couldn't really notice them because they were in the camp. Ruri wasn't sure, but that's what Matty had said. But it seemed to Alma that the wolfhound across from them was constantly sitting and ogling them. It bothered Ruri too, but at least he wasn't attacking them. Suddenly the tent along with the surprised girls jumped up. Even the wolfhound jumped up from the sudden jolt. Alma didn't understand what it was and questioned Ruri. Ruri suggested that there was an earthquake here. The wolfhound decided not to wait and to get out of there quickly. Meanwhile, on the 21st floor, there was a real massacre going on. After a while, Matty still managed to defeat the huge snake. Even so, the victory was quite hard for him. The special magic enhancement radiated magic power in all directions, and it could cause magic pollution. The magic pollution could create many strong monsters. To prevent the magic pollution, Matty had to control his magic. He didn't know if he could control it if he had to use even more magic stones. If the magic pollution happened, the capital of the kingdom would be wiped out. The girls were insanely happy when Matty came back in and greeted him. According to Alma, he came faster than she thought he would. The hero replied that his magical vault was full, and he had gotten down to the 21st floor. The girls were surprised to hear about the magic vault. Come to think of it, he could have sold the raw materials to the Adventurers Guild. Ruri agreed and said they could use their student cards. Matty agreed with them and suggested moving out. The heroes made their way out of the dungeon and headed straight to the Adventurers Guild in the capital branch. The guy apologized, after which he opened the doors and went inside with the girls. All the adventurers and the waitress who served the customers stared at the guests with interest. The adventurers immediately recognized the kids from the second academy. They were far from happy about these kids. Alma didn't understand what was wrong with them. In Matty's opinion, they had definitely gotten their attention. A certain girl walked towards them and clapped her hands and asked everyone to stop. The girl introduced herself as the registrar of the Adventurers Guild. She wasn't surprised that the students from the second academy were here again. She wondered what was going on at the second academy this year and assumed that the guys were new. The registrar was willing to bet that they had brought some trash fish from the surrounding forest like everyone else. Alma showed her tongue and said with a smile that they wanted to go to the dungeon. The receptionist smiled and said she expected that. The muttering of adventurers could be heard nearby. Everyone was discussing that all the first years went to the dungeon this year. There were many strong monsters in the surrounding forest as well. One of the guys said that they as adventurers would lose their jobs if they really did it. The guild registrar asked what they wanted for today. Their child group consisted of an honor tag, a normal second tag, and believed the unlucky Kuna, who was their personal porter. Ruri explained that Matty wasn't a porter at all. But Matty replied that right now he was indeed a porter, or should I say, he carried most of their goods. Guy realized that they still had prejudices about his mark lodged deep in their minds. Then he had no choice but to open his magic vault. Guy used unloading to free his vault from a bunch of huge and dangerous monsters. The guy said that this took it out of the dungeon for the day, and he would like to sell it all. The adventurers couldn't believe their eyes. Everyone seemed to be frozen in place and at a loss for words. An outcry immediately rose up among the people. They were asking for answers as to where he had gotten all these things from, and what these materials were in general. They knew that this year's first years were unusual, but they didn't think that they were this strong. People immediately thought that they probably bought these materials or stole them, but some didn't realize where they could have bought all this stuff. Ruri shouted that Matty hadn't done anything wrong. He had indeed gone through the entire dungeon, killed all the demons himself, and even created a sword equal to a national treasure. Pale with worry, the receptionist smiled and said that she had to check all that out first. She approached some man and discussed the situation with him. The receptionist clarified if he really wanted to sell it all. Matty dipped his hands into the vault again and said that he would like to sell them the magic stone as well. Alima and Ruri were also surprised by the stone, for Matty had said nothing about it. They found it hard to believe that it was really a magic stone, for it was over 30 centimeters. The hero explained that he had killed a monster snake on the 21st floor. The administrator could not believe these words, for the national treasure was nothing compared to this magic stone. Alma said that Matty was turning into a mass production machine for national treasures. It seemed to Ruri that he had indeed mass produced them before. The guy meanwhile didn't understand why they were so surprised. The girls were shocked when the guy told them about how this magic stone of outrageous size wasn't good enough for him. Matty said that this stone measured about only 55 centimeters. If it was even 3 centimeters bigger, it could be used to create a magic barrier, so it wasn't that good for him. The hero told them that if he wasn't good enough, that he just needed to find a better one. The assistant guild administrator said that a reply came from the director of the second academy. Edward said that there was a guy named Matty among them. There were a lot of abnormal things going on around him, so they should just accept it. Eventually, the guild realized that it was all pointless. In the end, their group sold everything for 750 gold coins. It was cheaper than a twice enchanted sword, but there were some materials that no one knew the price of. They would be auctioned off, so they would get the money for them later. The guy said that all they had to do was divide their reward. Each would receive 250 gold coins. Alma and Ruri thought that was too much for what they had done. Ruri suggested that they just follow the general rules and divide the money according to everyone's contribution. She thought that was the basis of each group. But Matty hadn't been in groups since he'd passed 120, so he didn't know much about it at all. As the sun began to set over the horizon, a strong wind blew in. It began to darken dramatically outside, but the boys felt a strange magical energy that made the girls afraid. The heroes raised their heads to the sky. At that moment, they were already being watched from above. The people had not suspected anything yet and were quietly going about their business. A couple of demons appeared in the sky and were already planning an attack on the city. From their senses, the girls realized that there were demons here. The hero said that he would hurry to the academy and ask them not to overdo it with their magic and get there as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the two demons were already heading towards the second academy.